Well, welcome to Bread Theory, everybody. Tonight I have a very special guest on. It is Andy from the Poor Prole's Almanac, a really great podcast. You can find it basically wherever you find podcasts, and I'll let him say a few words about what he does and all that good stuff. So welcome,
Sure.
Andy.
Yeah, so my name is Andy. I am the host of the Poor Prole's Almanac. Our podcast is about essentially thinking about agriculture from an ecological lens, collapse, and kind of if we all agree that what we're doing isn't sustainable, what comes after?
Very good, very good. What have been some recent topics that you've covered on your stream, or not on your stream, on your podcast? My mistake.
So the last couple episodes have been focused on traditional forest management methods in the UK. So coppicing, things like that, pollarding, land management, that type of stuff. We have an episode coming out this week on the involvement of indigenous people here in North America in the where in the landscape honey locusts have been moved to. So there's been some really interesting research on trying to track how honey locusts would have traveled versus how they have traveled. So it's a really interesting conversation and speaks to the fact that they were utilized as a really a sugar providing tree for indigenous people.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, so honey locusts are an interesting species that I think have a lot of opportunity for us when we start thinking about food systems. So
Absolutely.
someone has done the legwork in terms of doing the actual research on it versus me just like Googling it. And he's got some really interesting things to say. So that'll be out on Sunday night.
Cool. Well, look forward to that. I'm just curious, how do you get the sugar from the honey locust? Is it a matter of tapping the tree like you would a maple, or where does it come from?
So it's actually the honey locust pods.
Oh, really?
The sap that's inside around the beans themselves is pretty much sugar. So like
Really?
specific like Calhoun and a couple others are considered to have up to like 30 to 40% by volume sugar in that pulp, which is like super insane and speaks to the fact that it's a very underutilized. So I haven't been able to find anything at all about how it was like processed or if it was processed. But I have to imagine that it could be processed into some kind of granulated, storable form of sugar. And if that's possible, there's, especially here in the north, that's huge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, it's not like you can grow sugarcane way up there.
Exactly.
I mean,
like,
wow,
maple
that's
sugar
really
is
cool.
great, but like there has to be something else.
Yeah, it's definitely limited in what it can produce as well. And it's very seasonal as well. So
Yeah, you can granulate maple.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but it's it has a little bit of a different profile, and I think having an alternative would be great.
Absolutely. Well, that's really cool. All right. Well, so tonight we're going to be talking about the Transition Towns movement. We have a video, which I'm going to bring up right now. And this video is, it's a bunch of stuff, but it's basically giving you a nice overview of what it's about. It was started by a guy called Rob Hopkins in the UK, and his idea was to take permaculture principles and apply them to community building, specifically with the aim to kind of stave off, his main focus at the time was peak oil. He thought that there was an imminent energy collapse that was going to come. And we've seen through technologies like fracking and other ways of getting what used to be inaccessible energy that perhaps that time when peak energy happens is going to be pushed off further. But still, they always had a focus as well on climate change and some of the shocks to the system that it can produce. And those certainly are beginning to come true and have been for, really the past 20 years. We've been seeing that quite a lot. So it's definitely a very useful way of looking at things and organizing and just trying to start talking to neighbors about, what they would do if suddenly they didn't have things like on-demand delivery and all that sort of thing. So I think it's relevant to the sort of thing that both I and the Poor Prole's Almanac like to talk about. So that's why I chose it tonight. But I think we can get into the video right now. And as always, we welcome any questions you may have. Don't worry if you haven't seen any of this permaculture series yet. I know I'm up to episode 10, but I always like to help educate people about what permaculture is and how it can be applicable to a variety of things, including leftist movements of various sorts. So please, any questions you have, feel free to shout them out. And I am using Restream tonight, so no matter where you are finding this stream, if you type in a question, it'll get reposted across the different ones that I'm posting to at this time, so everyone will be able to see it, which is really cool. And let me know what you think of this different setup too. I'm definitely new to Restream. I used to only do it on Twitch, so love to know your thoughts on that as well. But let's get into the video tonight. And we'll just, and Andy, anytime you feel like stopping, don't hesitate to just, shout it out, and we'll discuss stuff.
Transition stimulates the creative juices of people on streets to get together beyond their differences to make best use of their resources, their energies, their spirits.
It's not about trying to change behaviour, it's about setting in place structures which can be available when needed. When there's the perceived need for them, they're there.
For me, transition is moving towards an economy where everyone has a value, everyone has a place, and everyone has a purpose. And that includes the environment having a purpose, but also people.
For me, as transition is more engaging with your community, building your community, and helping your community.
Everybody cares about their community, so everybody has something to offer, and I love that inclusivity about it. So to me, that's what transition is about.
So transition for me is imagining what our community looks like 20, 30, 50 years into the future, where we've done a really good job of creating something that's inclusive, that is thriving, where people are happy and our way of living is sustainable, and then figuring out today what we can do to help us get there.
Humans have been going, what's this stuff? Oil. We just found it. Oh, this can be quite useful. And so they've started using it more. And then, this is really useful. So they started using it even more. And we're increasing the levels that we use oil. And meanwhile, the levels of oil left are rapidly decreasing. And so that is causing a big problem. All the greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, that are released when we're burning it, go up into the air. It captures the heat from the sun, keeps it in, stops it from getting back out, bounces it back in, boom, 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 and it will actually heat up the earth, which will cause unstable weather. There's a general rising in temperature, the poles will start to melt, so the sea levels will rise, flood land, and it will generally cause climate chaos. Peak oil is also linked to another problem called economic crisis. Now, economic crisis is when the economy goes bust. So basically, for the economy to grow, first of all, you need consumers. Then you need stuff for the consumers to buy. The stuff is produced in factories, and the factories need cheap energy, such as oil. And when they don't get so much out of that cheap energy, because of peak oil, the stuff becomes more expensive, so less consumers buy it, and the economy shrinks. What transition people would want is for us to have a sustainable economy instead of one that grows and shrinks like anything, because the economy that we have now, it could go boom at any moment and just disappear. But if we have a sustainable economy, it won't.
So we all need to.
So I think that's a good place to pause for a second there. So again, he brought up the idea of peak oil, and the thinking behind all of that was that there's this thing called the Huber curve, where this I don't know exactly if he was an oil geologist or a petroleum geologist or what his background was, but he observed that in most oil fields, you have a lot of really cheap access to oil at the beginning. You know, it's like the Clampetts, right? The Beverly Hillbillies. He's just shooting at some food, and up from the ground comes a bubbling crude, that sort of thing. So it's like right there at the surface, easy to get. But then after about 30 years, he saw all of these oil wells lining up that they peaked in production. And from that point on, you couldn't get as much out because it was getting to the harder and harder to reach places. So just physically, there was no way to do it. And so the prediction was that places like Saudi Arabia, like these really oil-rich places, would all hit that point at before 2020. And obviously that probably hasn't happened yet due to a lot of factors. Probably a big factor was the advent of fracking and other ways of getting energy out. I think probably things like coal gasification played a bit of a role. But mainly things like fracking. So on the one hand, it is true that you're going to have some point where you're not going to be able to extract fossil fuels at the same rate. It's a physical limit, right? At some point, because we are burning through many times more oil, coal, and gas than we're using in a given year, eventually it's going to catch up with us and we'll have less available.
Yeah, and I think like the term that's really helpful is EROI, the energy return on energy. It's actually EROE. And I think solar is around, I think it's 13 to 1 right now. It's 13, 14 to 1. And oil is still around 19 or 20 to 1, or vice versa. So like until it costs less energy to produce solar than it does oil or any other alternative energy, it's not going to matter, even if it is more expensive to drill it out, because it's cheaper than the alternative.
It's just the way the market forces work, right? They always trend towards the cheapest source. So yeah, that's kind of a depressing fact, but when profit becomes the biggest motive, the driving factor, then that's basically what you have to do. Nothing can come above profit, right? If you have any sort of an industry that depends on it, which is basically all industries today depend on fossil fuels. So even if you really want to do things better, like you said, either you're going to spend a lot of extra money and that eats into your profit to convert your facility to cleaner options, or you just do it because you got to do it and you keep on with those fossil fuels. So it's depressing on the one hand, but on the other, at least at some point, that shift should happen where we do get to a point where it's just cheaper all around to do non-fossil fuel ways of getting energy. But really, I struggle with the entire idea of just trying to replace one-to-one the fossil fuel industry. Like, it doesn't address the need for energy and the excessive amounts of energy that we use in our modern civilizations.
Yeah, and that speaks to like there's that day. What is it, like the I don't remember what it's called, but there's a day, it's usually in June or July, where we hit the point of using up all the energy that the sun sends to us for the full year. So
right.
we're dipping into previous, stored energy caches. That's clearly not sustainable in a long-term, society. So even if it is green energy, we're still doing that regardless how we're getting that energy. And I mean, obviously, if we were to switch over to solar today, that's great. And it would save probably a lot of lives, but it still doesn't deal with the fundamental issue of the way we live.
Right. Right. And that's where these entire shifts in the way we view civilization, like transition towns is trying to push, that's where that comes into play. So what they want to do is completely rearrange the way we do things, so that we're not just thinking about how can we get the same amount of energy for less damage to the earth, but how can we live differently so we live lightlier or more lightly on the earth. So it's interesting. It's an interesting movement, and I think I'll continue on just a little bit before I go too much more into that.
Transition in some way or another, but we need a guide. Our culture is so strongly set up for us to be consumers and to be unaware of what's going on in the world, that to make those changes you need support. And so transition, the community supports us.
Just 1 second there. We had a good question in chat. I'm assuming it's like MA art tonight, or oh man, that's a lot of stuff together. MA art on Pirate. I'm struggling with your names, so if you could give me like a nickname to call you by. Anyway, they say that following that logic, will there be a period where nuclear will become the alternative instead of the renewables? Do you want to take that one, Andy?
Sure, I guess. So nuclear also has its own challenges, and again, it doesn't address. I'm not really like the best on understanding how nuclear. Like, I understand how it works, but I don't understand how to like articulate the shortfalls in a way that I think is really helpful, other than the fact that it doesn't change the fact we have to rethink about our lifestyle and where that energy is coming from.
Right.
So I'll hand it off to you. How about that?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So from what I understand, one of the shortfalls of nuclear is that it's a very much a centralized form of production because of the permitting that goes into creating something that is dangerous, obviously, if left unattended to. I mean, we've seen that with the Chernobyl meltdown for a good example, but then also with I can't remember the one in Japan, what that one was called. But basically, nuclear can be dangerous if it's not handled correctly and if it's not, properly girded against what is going to be a more and more volatile climate. The flooding, tsunamis, tornadoes, hurricanes, all these things can jeopardize a nuclear plant in ways that could be extremely dangerous to people for, the rest of the time that we can even imagine humanity existing. So that's one problem. And another problem with that, though, is that it might be good for large cities that have a huge power draw, but for small towns, it's never going to be the stopgap. I don't think there's any such thing as micro-nuclear. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone out there knows anything different, but it tends to be just a very large-scale project. So you're centralizing energy and taking on that, all the dangers that can come with centralizing any system. Imagine the last power outage you went through. It probably was because some centralized power part of the power grid went out. And depending on if there's a disaster accompanying that, it could be days or weeks before you get that back on. Not so much the case if you have more of a distributed system where you have small energy generation happening in a lot of different places, like with solar panels or small scale wind or that sort of thing. You kind of hedge your bets a little bit against catastrophic failure. And then, of course, there's problems with nuclear with the storage of the waste. It's like you got to put it somewhere where, generations of people can't really use that area. So they've tried putting it into caves in Utah, I think. And they've floated different ideas of how to store it. But one way or another, you have to deal with that waste once whatever it is, the plutonium, the uranium, whatever it is you're using, is degraded enough where it can't generate power anymore.
And I'll say I live near a closed nuclear power plant, and most of the waste is still sitting there because they pretty much don't know where to put it.
Exactly.
And my own perspective is thinking about if we agree that what exists today isn't sustainable, in terms of like the way we're living, not just like our lifestyle, but like our economic model, our political model is like it's heading towards a brick wall or a cliff or whatever, then do you want more of these systems in place that require those massive supply chains and all these other things that, you know, may or may not exist in the future, depending on how pessimistic you are?
That's a fantastic point as well. Yeah. What happens if, for whatever reason, your local area cannot economically support that power plant anymore? Maybe you have a city that the dominant industry has left, like you're in part of like the Rust Belt or something like that, and you're having negative population. Well, eventually, there's just not going to be enough power need to have the entire plant running. So what do you do with it at that point? Someone still has to tend it basically forever. So yeah, that's a good point. Any sort of
feels sort of like mutual assured destruction. For
exactly.
Those of you that are familiar with that reference.
Yeah. That's a good point. A lot. We'll
take down the earth if we don't get to survive.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So it's Martin Pirate in Dutch, the chatter says. So I see Martin Pirate. Okay. Is that a little bit closer to how it goes? Anyway, so they say, yeah, I know about the issues, but would it probably be the preferred source in the current capitalist system? It'd be more like a worry of mine than a viable solution. Yeah, it'd be a worry of mine as well.
And I'll also say on that matter, nuclear is not profitable. There's massive subsidies that go into place. So in terms of like, if we're talking about the market, the reason why it hasn't gotten bigger is because of the fact that the only places it does well is places like France, where it's massively subsidized. And it doesn't really, it doesn't challenge oil, despite the fact that when the systems are up, that they are incredibly efficient. The trade-off is that it costs so much to get them up, and then that constant maintenance that there's promises in the future that it will be able to be scaled to a way that would be, you know, cheap, free energy, whatever. But
right.
As long as I've been alive, they've been saying that's 10 years down the road, and I'm sure in 20 years they'll be saying it's 10 years down the road.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like how nuclear fission is always 10 years down the road, and we never quite get there. If we did get to that point, though, well, then perhaps nuclear would be back on the table, because fission doesn't have most of the problems I'm sorry, fusion. Fusion, I meant to say, not fission. Fission is what we got now, breaking apart molecules. Fusion is putting them together, right? So if we ever got to nuclear fusion, then that might be a game changer in terms of world energy. At the same time, look at what we've done with all the energy we have now. We've massively destabilized every ecosystem we've come into. It's only because of the energy we have that, say, suburbia can maintain their acres and acres of mowed lawn. There's an interesting statistic that the amount of mowed and watered grass is the largest irrigated crop in the U.S. So mowed lawns with irrigation is the largest irrigated crop in the U.S., which is just phenomenal to think about, considering, you know, how you don't really think of suburbia as being all that big compared to the vast cornfields and stuff. But all that's only possible because we have a lot of energy. And when energy is cheap and really available, you might do things like grow a lawn in Las Vegas because you can. You can pump the water as long as you possibly can and just keep it green. That's not necessarily the best thing for the local ecology, though. So there is that problem as well with all this energy stuff. So what Transition Towns is aiming at then is to get away from this idea of just switching energy and trying to reorganize our lives to need less energy, for one, and to perhaps live in a way that's different, but not worse, but can also be better, where you can have perhaps more community connections and cohesion, something that's kind of lacking a lot. So I have a chatter in the Twitch chat asking, what do I think about demarchy? Demarchy. I'm not quite sure what you mean. That's a new term to me, so if you can give me a quick definition, I could answer that, but I don't know yet. So yeah, let's watch a little bit more of the video, and then we'll continue on with our thoughts.
A nossa sociedade hoje em dia não é sustentável, portanto surge como alternativa a todo este comportamento consumista e cada vez mais insustentável que estamos a ter.
It's the way to create a world of people that are more connected. They're more connected with themselves and each other and the natural world around them.
Everybody can feel they have something to offer and contribute, and it isn't something for experts out there somewhere to do.
And it really feels like it's given me a momentum and a real kind of sense of purpose in my life.
And because it's a lot of fun. It's so rewarding, so nourishing to get to know people really, really well and talk about real things.
I enjoy talking to peoples. I enjoy, helping peoples. I enjoy building my community.
Let's pause it right there for a second. Okay, so demarchy is choosing leader by random. I think there's definitely merit to that if we're talking about more pure forms of representative democracy, where leaders are just chosen from perhaps, say, the neighborhood level to represent then the city and then the region and the state and so far up and up the chain. There's definitely some merit to that. It helps keep power out of people who probably shouldn't have power. But I don't want to get too far off on that tangent right now, since we are talking about transition towns tonight. So there you have it there. And thanks for the follow as well, Cupid. So yeah, what we just saw in the video there, these people were talking about how this has really become a big part of their lives. They feel much more connected to their community. They feel like they're doing real things to address community needs now and in the future. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that, Andy?
No, I think it's very similar to what the Zapatistas have done, where people are chosen for fixed periods of time, and they are chosen by their community, and they can only hold office for a short period of time. I want to say it's like 3 or 6 months. And part of it is that they don't get a wage, and that they essentially the village that elects them essentially chooses that they will take on the responsibilities of that person. So like there's an investment on their side of like, I'm going to do your job for you. I'm going to take care of your kids, your chickens, whatever it might be, so that you can represent us for a short period of time. So it's kind of similar, and I think speaks to that, like the removal of the power of the leadership, which I think is really important.
I think that sounds really cool. If they're not being paid then for their service, I would assume that the local communities are then supporting them in other ways, giving them the basics they need for their life. Well,
like I said, they literally go and do their jobs for them.
Yeah. I see. I missed that part.
Like, it's quite literally there. If somebody has a job and they get elected, other people's part of electing them is being like, I'm going to do what you need to do. Do you need your kids watched? Do you need your garden tended? Whatever it might be, like, we're going to take care of it for you. So
that's really cool.
It's a cool model.
Yeah, man, I would love to dig it more into like the Zapatista movement, as well as the Rojavan movement as well. It sounds pretty cool what they've achieved so far. I missed one chat back there from Martin Pirate saying government picking winners is a big problem. Government picks winners right now, and right now it is picking capitalists as winners, people that already have a lot of money and resources at their disposal. They pick them as winners by going around the world and securing things like energy and other resources, often by force, and giving them no-bid contracts whenever we quote-unquote win an invasion of a country. That happened a lot in Iraq. So the government is already picking winners. They're just picking a very small handful. By choosing to support different energy strategies or different strategies to do with less energy, the government's not then picking winners and losers so much as they're orienting society towards the outcome they want to have. And if we as a society decide we want to have a future that stands a chance of withstanding these ravages of climate change, that much of which is already, they're saying, pretty irreversible. If we want to stand a chance, then why wouldn't we want our government to orient itself towards the best possible solutions? At any level of government you're talking about, really. All right. We can continue on here. Just in case you missed it, this is the Transition Town official initiatives that have sprung up around the world. So they're starting with the UK where it started. So over 200 initiatives, and they'll continue on from there.
Transition starts with a group of people coming together, and that group of people can come from a range of different places. They might be a group that's already been meeting as something else, might be a group of people who already know each other but don't work formally together. It might be a group of people who meet at an event or in the pub and say, why don't we start Transition? But that initial coming together of people, that forming the group is the seed for the whole process.
The first event was on the 3rd of April. 8 people showed up. 8 people showed up to that first event. And then the second event, 1 person showed up. And I remember coming home and my husband commiserating with me for the low turnout. And I looked at him and I said, you're wrong. You know, all the people who came were the right people. And we have the saying in Transition that whoever comes is the right person. And I was very skeptical about that. Oh yeah, sure. And I must say it's true. It totally turned out to be true. Of those 8 people who came to the first event, 4 of them are now part of Transition Wayland, of the initiating group. And that 1 person who showed up, he's part of Transition Wayland initiating group as well. Now the last event at the library, there were maybe 10 of us. Most of us was Transition Wayland. We talked into the night. The librarian had to kick us out of the library because we just went over. And I walked out of there knowing that that was my own event that I had planned, and I was walking on clouds because I knew we had a group.
Just pause it for a second there. So one thing about organizing these sorts of events, if you're interested so far in like getting together with neighbors and trying to at least start talking about this stuff, one thing you got to keep in mind is, just like we were talking about with the Zapatista movement, where people had to do the jobs for the person who is doing the political leadership work, there's going to be a big barrier to entry to people that don't have a lot of excess time. People that might need childcare, people that might need to eat during the little bit of time in the evening that they have free. So if you're wanting to attract a wide variety of people and have this available to everybody, these are some things you should be thinking about. Like, can we do a potluck when we have these meetings? Can we have some people volunteer to watch children? These sorts of things are going to get better participation. I actually started a Transition Towns movement in the North Metro of the Twin Cities here, and it's still going. I think there's still a few people there. I don't live in that area anymore, so I don't really go to the meetings, but the people that were able to come were entirely, except for myself, homeowners for one thing, and people that had comfortable jobs that made a comfortable living, right? And that just goes to show that when we're talking about these volunteer movements, if it's going to be a real grassroots movement, you got to do it in a way that's going to be appealing and accessible to a wide swath of people.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things you probably would notice in your own local government is that most of the folks that run local government are wealthy, or I use the word townies, but I mean more like integrated into the community with power because of their relationships within the community. And part of that is usually being part of that small business owner class. Even if it's somebody that's not wealthy, it's somebody that can make their own hours. And why that's so important is because of how local meetings are usually scheduled. They're designed around schedules that don't usually fit the average worker's schedule. So it gives essentially exclusive access to specific types of people to run local government. So it's an interesting model that's designed right in front of your face, essentially, to be exclusive. And that's one of the reasons why, if you go to town meetings, and why there are so many town meetings, is because they're designed so you don't want to go, and that the people that are doing things can do them without anyone challenging them.
That's a very good point as well. Yeah. So it's important to keep in mind in all of this, the way that political organizing is oriented, basically, is the same thing that you're saying, Andy, is that it is towards the capital holders already. When it's run by them, when it's only basically accessible to them and useful to them, and they're the ones that have the best chance of, getting a redress of grievances if some issue comes up, then who is the government really for, other than capitalists and capital interests? So it makes it hard to organize, even at the local level. But perhaps by if you can at least get something going where you can have enough people come together that they can start forming this sort of support network for one another, maybe at that point you can start participating in local government as well. I think that is one of the end goals of these transition towns movements, is to get an initiative passed at their local city council. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And if you are wanting to organize this sort of thing, or anything really, and you find that not a lot of people are able to show up, don't try not to be discouraged, I would say, because there probably are those barriers. So just focus on how you can help eliminate as much of that as possible, and you're probably going to get a better turnout, just whatever it is that you're doing. Welcome, Bread Crochets. Everyone give Bread Crochets a follow if you're on Twitch right now. They are a great leftist streamer who also does a lot of political theory content as well. But yeah, let's continue on in the video here. By the way, we are talking about transition towns, which is permaculture, ethics and principles applied to community organizing with the aim of withstanding shocks to the system like climate change and other stuff, and trying to work towards a low energy future voluntarily before any such thing is needed per se.
What we've observed from looking at what transition groups are doing as part of this 5-year experiment we've been doing is that they go through a number of stages. The first stage we call starting out, which is that creative, playful, storming sort of stage where you're running around, showing films, putting up posters, organising events, doing awareness raising stuff, starting to lay the foundations for what will become the transition initiative. But at that stage you might not even call it transition wherever.
Moss Side is very, very in a city area. It's very densely populated. It's very multicultural, and it's had this horrific reputation as being the Bronx of Britain. And because it's so densely populated, you can go along a whole row of houses, knocking at quite a speed. Like as soon as someone's not in, you can move on. I worked for a double glazing company, knocking on doors doing that. I worked for an energy company as well. That kind of built up my confidence in door knocking. And I just thought, well, I know I can knock on people's doors and be persuasive and make a good impression. So I believe in transition so much more than I believe in those other things. So that increased my confidence as well and made me think, actually, I could probably do a really good job of door knocking for transition as well. And I think you get a very different response through the door knocking than you probably do through any other type of awareness raising. It's a numbers game, the majority of people, I guess, probably don't sign up, and it's just a case of keeping going. And then what's the best way of getting in touch with you?
I'm always in, I'm in every day.
You're always in?
Yeah.
Okay, great, so just make a note, so it's 15.
Every day.
One of our core group members, Ali Mohammed, who I met through door knocking, had not, as far as I know, been involved in any kind of environmental work before.
When I first saw Joe, obviously, and
so 1 second, I just want to pause it there. So Martin Pirate, you're saying that the video on the stream is laggy. That's probably just Restream doing that. It's looking smooth from my end, so I don't really know when that's happening. I apologize for that. So sorry about that, but hopefully you can at least follow along with the closed captions, even if the video itself is a little choppy, or the audio.
I wasn't that much of thinking what he's doing is great, but I was open to him and I was listening to what he's saying, because I thought like this person, especially when he said Mossad, I thought like this is something about our community, and so I started listening from that time.
The door knocking seemed to me like a really kind of exciting way of just engaging new people who've not been involved at all in any kind of environmental activity before.
Good to know your neighbours as well, because if something happened to you, your neighbour could help you. And one of the door knocking as well, then we building up this relationship with our community. And if we build this relationship, then that means that our community is well protected, and people know each other and they can help each other.
There's no right way to do transition. Sometimes you'll start your core group, and then one of the first things that core group will do is to start an awareness raising program. So it'll do flyers and posters and show films and so on. The other way round often is that just a handful of people, or maybe even one person, will start an awareness raising program, go out, show films, network with other organisations, do all that sort of thing. And then from that program of awareness raising, the core group will emerge. And neither is the right way. It's really about what feels appropriate in your place.
So, I mean, that ties into a core permaculture principle of creatively adapting to change. So you look at the way things are going within the people that are showing up. You look at their needs and their comfortability levels with doing different activities, and you kind of go from there. You don't impose on it something that has to be followed. And I admire that about the Transition Towns movement. There actually is a handbook that you can follow. I'll look up the title later on and put it out in the chat. But you don't have to either. Like when I formed my group, we're a bunch of people getting together who like talking about climate change, and at the time we were again talking about peak oil. But it doesn't have to really even go beyond that necessarily. It's just about making that initial connection to get things going. All right, let's continue on then.
A terra onde vivemos pertence aos nossos netos. Temos de viver do que ela nos dá, sem estragar e sem depender de outras regiões. A aldeia das Amoreiras é a nossa terra e temos de a gerir sustentavelmente. O primeiro passo é sonhar.
Qual é que é o seu sonho para a aldeia? Qual é a sua aldeia de sonho? Ok?
Eu não gostei que baixei ninguém. Os velhos têm morrido. Os novos vão tornar a vida para o outro lado. E cada dia está aí com medo de velhos e pronto. Tenho ideia de uma boa conversa, a gente todos uns com os outros, que é o que temos falta, de conviver bem uns com os outros todos e auxiliar-se, se a gente pudesse.
O meu sonho, sabe o que era? Era uma casa aí, por exemplo, aí o médico, que na posse lá acima, era o meu sonho.
Algumas coisas mais para as crianças, tipo alguns jardins mesmo para crianças, um parque.
Ah, já que é de jardim, não?
Comércio para coisa, para as pessoas poderem se receber e fazer grandes deslocamentos, ir a Ourique, ir ali.
Então ter mais comércio na aldeia.
Ter um bocadinho de comércio na aldeia.
Era muito bom que fossem apenas alguns dos pontos a serem realizados, dos sonhos das pessoas. Era muito bom porque a aldeia precisava mesmo disso para ficar mais dinâmica e sustentar-se a si própria, que era o que no fundo ela precisava.
vision of the future becomes like throwing a magnet or a whirlpool in front of you that over time starts to draw you in that direction. There's a real power to doing that, I think.
That might be a good place to stop there. So when you're talking about your stuff, Andy, which tends to focus more on like homesteading and that sort of thing, and maybe more individual action, how do you look at the concept of like dreaming and visioning the future?
Like in the sense of how I envision it, or like what my process is?
Like the role that it plays in, like, you know, deciding what actions to take, what direction to take, that sort of thing.
Okay, so I guess I would say, like, when I try to, like, with the podcast, I'll just use that as kind of my lens to have this answer for you. I try to think about the most likely scenario and what the best response is for that most likely scenario. And for, like, my best case scenario out of the most likely scenario is, you know, as things start to fall apart, that we find ways to utilize what's considered our biggest weakness, which is suburbia, and twist it into something that can actually be our biggest strength, because of the fact that with suburban areas, you know, you've created essentially the most fertile, widespread area on the earth. You've got 4 inches of topsoil across hundreds of thousands of acres, and that could be incredibly utilized. There's so much opportunity there, and it's about, for me, painting that opportunity and giving people the skills so that they can see that opportunity and understand how, ideally, come to that conclusion on their own without me being like, hey, this is what we need to think about for the future, but more of, now you have this knowledge, you have these skills. Like, you look at a front yard and your thought process is, wow, there's a whole bunch of them. How can we utilize this quickly and efficiently? You know, you could dig up the whole front yard and plant gardens, or you could get a couple sheep and cows and graze suburbs. I mean, the opportunities are endless, but that process has to be framed in the reality of where we live, and not the reality of what, you know, your theory suggests is the best conditions.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So I don't know if that answered what you were asking, but
no, it definitely did. It definitely did. I just wanted to talk a little bit about those vignettes that you like to put out at the front of your episodes. Like, for me, that really helps me envision, like, the way that the episode is going to go and how it's going to focus. And it really does give me a good vision of the future that you are imagining, and then the tools that you're kind of trying to array against the worst case scenarios happening. So for those who haven't listened to the podcast, basically, it starts with what would you even call it? Like a short fiction?
Yeah. So the first season we started with like almost similar to like It Could Happen Here, the beginning of those episodes, where it's a couple minutes like painting what our future might look like in 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, what that, you know, people say collapse, and what does that actually look like? You know, while, you know, there's plenty of movies on what that looks like, they're not really accurate.
No.
And, you know, we were just talking about energy and energy production. Like, those systems have incredible amounts of sunk costs, and that upkeep is pretty low. It's all those upfront costs that go into them. So like, collapse doesn't mean there's no power, there's no water. You know, chances are all those systems will exist long after like the authority of the government doesn't.
Right.
Police will still exist long after the authority of the government exists, because of the fact that they have massive amounts of weapons and, you know, bullets.
True.
So like, understanding, like, when we talk about collapse, what are the things that are collapsing and what isn't, and then utilizing that to frame up how we think about what we need to know and the skills that we need to have for the future is, at least that's my interest and my goals, is to start thinking along those lines.
I'm curious what resources you kind of drew upon to come up with those visions for the future, like whether they were books or movies or whatever.
A lot of research on essentially places where there have been collapse.
Okay.
So that's usually like firsthand accounts. You know, usually looking at, like, if you go into like death tolls from places with civil war and things like that, you can usually aggregate the data into, what are the causes of that death. So even if you look at some place like Syria, which has lost half of its population in 5 years, the amount of people that have died from, say, dehydration is almost none. And that's an incredibly arid part of the world. So I think that, again, when we start thinking about these systems, we have to understand which ones exist and require little maintenance to keep them going and will probably continue on, and what won't, and understanding how those things relate and how those can come to a confluence and cause bigger problems or feed into one or another thing or something like that. And that's where, to circle back, that's where a lot of those vignettes kind of started from, is trying to paint those experiences framed up here in the United States.
That's really cool. And you do a great job with them. I mean, they do really sound realistic, and like a lot of thought has actually gone into them. It's not just a, post-apocalyptic sort of zombie collapse sort of scenario. But you really put in, it shows that you put in a lot of cool effort, or a lot of good effort, I should say. So yeah, I really do appreciate those. Cool. Well, I think we can continue on a little bit further in the video.
If our vision is that we have communities that are thriving, where people feel included, where people have a sense of well-being, we need the basics of our living systems to be working for that. But actually the biggest journey, I think, and the biggest transition that we need to make is actually on the inside. So to understand how to create well-being in people, because it's not through having masses of stuff. Actually, we need a culture that supports people into a state of well-being. Something about what goes on inside us, both that we're aware of and just to start to feel into what also happens that we're not so aware of, and how much those things that are happening inside us shape the way that we are with each other, shape what we do in the world. So a way of looking into how does a human being work on the inside. That the way that we've made the world that has this focus on competition, on getting as much as you can, on keeping up with the people that have more than you, and often seeing the other person or the person who's different as somebody who's a threat, that comes actually out of a state of consciousness and something that's happening inside us. And until we can feel that and own that and look at what's happening and work with it in some way, that will keep on expressing itself in the world.
The second stage we call deepening, which is where you realise all of a sudden, hey, we are now transitioning wherever it is, and we're becoming an organisation, and we're having to make things a bit more structured and a bit more formal, and it feels very different from that initial starting out phase. It feels like you are becoming an organisation.
I was looking for a place to blog. Whenever I found Transition, it seemed like they were basically working with all of the tools that I was trying to implement. It seemed like, there was a lot of knowledge there, and I really wanted to tap into the knowledge resources. I noticed that there was permaculture stuff on there, which was something that I was interested in, something that I wanted to start to integrate into urban areas. Transition was like a culmination of everything that I was interested in the one website. It's kind of tough to find other people like that. I used to not think that there was anybody that was really interested in gardening, my age. And Transition Pittsburgh and, that website and everything associated with it just kind of showed me that there are people out there that, are gardening, which was kind of considered a girly hobby in the past, to where now, I can listen to heavy metal, dress like a punk, and still garden and be cool. We're in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Pittsburgh. It's a blighted area by any means. Well, first thing we do in the morning is we like to go and check the abandoned houses to make sure that there's no squatters in them, so it's at least safe for us to operate. We're gonna do the yellow house. 20% of the lots here or boarded up or vacant lots.
Hello?
Hello? Anybody home? Well, the good news is there's nobody in here. This is Whitney Avenue Urban Farm. There were houses here, I think, 5-6 years ago before they burnt down. Everything that we grow here is pretty much given away for free or donated to the food bank. People from the neighborhood also know that they're welcome to come here and pick fruits and vegetables whenever they feel like it.
Well, Chris and Carly came on Whitney Avenue. It was a street mainly of vacant houses and old dead lots, and they beautified this whole street single-handedly. It started people appreciating what they eat. Some people on the street was hungry and they could go up to that garden and pick something to eat.
We work with the kids in the neighborhood to do this. Basically, you know, we had a whole bunch of kids that got in a whole lot of trouble and we needed a way to keep them occupied and keep them busy, and this turned out to be our way.
When I first started gardening, I said, that's lame. It still is kind of, but it keeps me out of trouble.
We had other kids on the street that was giving Brandon a bad influence. He was following other kids that was a bad influence on him. And then, so once the kids moved away, and then Chris and Carly gave him projects to do, he turned out to be a nice little kid.
When you start picking the food from the garden, what do you do with it?
Like the corn?
All of it.
Oh, we sold it.
Oh yeah, where'd you sell it?
Right over there.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Want to take me there?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go.
We wait for the people to come down there. Then we ask them, do they want to buy some tomatoes or some zucchini or corn? And if they say no, we say, thank you, have a nice day.
We love the kid. He's like a son to me, you know? I want to teach him everything that he's not getting at home. What happened here in Wilkinsburg, one of the main things that the downfall has been attributed to was the loss of fathers, basically. A lot of kids that are here have either their fathers are in jail, they were murdered at some point, or they've just disappeared altogether. There were gangs here, and whenever the FBI came in and dismantled the gangs, then, you know, that meant they hauled off and threw in jail for 20 years, sometimes 60, 70 people at a clip, all men, most of them fathers. My goal over time would be to establish more of these types of gardens around Wilkinsburg so that people can feed themselves. This is a model, what I'm doing here, of what could be done in really every street in Wilkinsburg has at least one lot that's had a house torn down in it. You know, it's ridiculously simple. And I'd like to see every little neighborhood in Wilkinsburg should have a little garden. In a way, I guess I am showing them sustainability, but they were not. I don't even think most of the people on the street could have told you what sustainability was 2 years ago.
It's changed the block to where everybody else in Wilkinsburg envy our little street. Everybody wants to come to Whitney Avenue, but it's the best street in Wilkinsburg. I'm crying, you got me crying. It makes me feel proud to myself, because when my family come around, I feel proud of where I live at. And that's changed me.
All right. I would say, I've watched this video previously, but I would say of all the projects that they highlight in this particular video, that's my favorite one. I love the guy's attitude. He didn't come in trying to impose some solution from without. He didn't say, this is what your problems are and this is how I'm going to fix them. He worked directly with the people that were already there. And he used the freedom that can come from places that are forgotten and abandoned and turned it into a resource. Like food is one of those basic needs that everyone has, of course. And just that one little thing can it can really turn things around in a way, or it can at least be the start of actual change, you know. And if you were to like take that project to say that like the next level, and instead of just taking over the yards, if he got the community together to fix up those houses, to collectively buy them and provide housing for people that don't have it, I mean, that could be yet another of those key blocks to stability that people need. So I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I think it's important, the fact that he spent time talking about making it accessible in language that they understood, as opposed to like coming in and, you know, spouting about, in his case, permaculture, and saying like all these different terms that might be inaccessible or mean nothing, or just sound like, hey, some white guy just moved into a neighborhood and is going to tell us how to live. You know, instead it was more about meeting them on their terms and what they understood, whether that was through the food they were growing, or, you know, in the fact that they were talking about like you can go there and pick something. So by definition, the food is something that they know how to cook and eat, or, you know, you're not growing, you know, quinces or something that people,
right.
You know, 90% of people don't know how to eat or cook. And that accessibility is so important in those types of projects.
Absolutely. And you're right. Yeah, he's not going in with a bunch of exotic stuff that may or may not work better in those particular lots. He's meeting the people where they're at, and trying to offer them stuff that they're already used to and find value in already, rather than, again, trying to impose some other preconceived notion of what's good for them. So I really appreciate that aspect as well.
And I get the impression just from the way he was talking that they may or may not have full legal ability to do all the things they're doing, which also is even better, because he was just like, oh, we go into these houses and there's no way that an entire neighborhood's worth of landlords were like, yeah, you can go into this property that I haven't been paying taxes on. Like, it's not happening.
Right. No,
like,
absolutely.
There's no landlord that's like, I know this place is a total like fire trap. Like, go in it every day and meet the homeless people that aren't supposed to be there so you can sue me. Like, no way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing point. And, you know, one of the things that I've found with these transition towns groups and how they tend to form, just like the one that I helped form, is they tend to be people that already have land. And so they've already been indoctrinated a lot into the capitalist mindset of private property and you know, I can imagine that my group that I founded would never have wanted to do anything that was illegal, even if it was like guerrilla gardening or something like that. But when you start out in places that, I mean, the law is kind of nebulous at that point. Like, who actually does own that land? Who actually is taking care of it? Maybe nobody. There's a good chance that a lot of those landlords are just completely absentee, maybe even live in another state, have never even visited the property. But you're taking something that otherwise would just rot, and you're bringing life to it and community. I just think that's awesome. A lot of people are agreeing with the anarchy aspect of it, and I think that's what direct action should be, more so than say marches or protests or any sort of demonstration. Like, this is real direct action that gets at the heart of what people really need, and
I feel like in practice, if there were not cameras around, if there are people squatting in the houses, he wouldn't care, or he would invite them to help with his projects. And knowing most the squatters that I've met in my life, I think most of them would be down to. So
Absolutely.
like, I don't think if there are people squatting that it is a coincidence that they're there. It's because they want to be involved.
Right. Yeah. I totally get that feeling that, it's more a thing of respect. Of like, you know, are you using this property right now? And I don't want to be seen as invading your space and that sort of thing. So that's definitely how I took it as well. That's cool. All right, let's move on.
In terms of practical projects, food is where a lot of transition groups get started first, because you don't have to wait for anything to get on with that. You don't need permission to do it, you don't need funding to do it. If you want to set up a windmill on the edge of your town, that could take you 5 or 6 years. You can start a garden share scheme, you can start growing food, you can start window boxes, you can start that really, really quickly and really simply. So what we see time and time again is it's local food projects are the first things transition initiatives do, and the first thing that they start to gain some momentum around.
Kilburn Station on the Jubilee line, and 4 months ago these beds were empty, and that's what gave us the idea of asking the Tube, could we plant something here? And we specifically wanted fruit and vegetables to show people how easy it is to grow fruit and vegetables anywhere. We believe this is the only Tube platform in London that's got fruit and vegetables growing on it, and even an apple tree. And part of the reason that we've got this plot in such a high-profile place, with 12,000 people coming through the station every day, we're delighted with the idea that a commuter can get off the train and pick a strawberry or a tomato and munch it on the way home. It's fantastic.
We went to Transport for London and asked if we could grow some food here. And I think at first their reaction was a little bit nervous. We don't want to grow food there, but we're quite happy for you to plant flowers. So our first attempt at it was a little bit disheartening. So when we went to have a meeting with them, they introduced the idea of the Underground in Bloom, and they said, well, we'd love for you to do this as part of our Underground in Bloom competition. And when we went through the list of categories to see which one we may want to enter, they seemed to be genuinely surprised that there was a grow your own food category. So we pointed it out to them and said, well, we'd love to take part in that. We have an apple tree and we have some veg seeds that they weren't even aware that, they were allowed to grow food on their platforms. It pays to be persistent, because sometimes, like with a lot of things, it depends on personalities that are involved, and they might not really be willing to take a risk, but some people just get really excited about it. So it depends on which person you speak to at any organisation. A different way of seeing the place that you see. Like, I've been living here for 10 years, so to see it in a totally different light, this is the first time that I've ever done something that's made these connections in this area for me. And that's quite an exciting thing.
It's really important when we do.
So that project, I think, is pretty cool, because it just highlights that the number one thing in deciding what you want to do is to imagine what could be, and finding all these different little spaces that your vision could fit in. Like just having a little bit of food on that platform probably is not going to feed all that many people, but it's the idea that it's just one more spot that can be filled in and used in a different way and reimagined. I think is really important. And then you can start seeing other spots. Maybe there's a church nearby who has a huge grassy field. I know there's one across the street from my place, has a huge grassy field that they do nothing with. Maybe if you just went up to and approached a place like that, you could start these sort of initiatives, and just have one more spot that people are starting to think differently about where their food comes from and how their community is going to be going forward.
Yeah, succinct.
Thanks. All right.
Transition that we design in some space to celebrate. There's that cycle of dreaming and planning and then doing something, and then remembering to celebrate what you've done before you go back into that cycle again.
Oh, that's a good point too. Who's that? World Eater 85. Yeah, turn those liminal spaces into growing places. Absolutely, that's a good way of putting it, and that conforms, or that follows very well the permaculture ethic of using the marginal, or was it using edges and valuing the marginal. It's those spaces that people don't really think about, but could have a lot of potential. So yeah, very good point. Thank you.
Celebrating appreciations, all of that positive communication really helps us as human beings just to feel resourced and good about ourselves. That where we create space to celebrate each other's achievements, to appreciate the qualities that we see in each other, people build trust and they enjoy being together. Whereas if we're in a constant state of pressure and we don't have time for that because we're moving on to the next thing, actually that's just a recipe for people to be exhausted very quickly. in every meeting there should be some celebration and appreciation of what's happened, as well as having events where you very consciously celebrate the things that you've done.
It would be really...
So here's another component, you know, not just doing, you know, very, you know, nuts and bolts sort of things of meeting people's needs, but you know, binding the community together through things like festivals and beauty and art and all that sort of thing. Also very important, because, you know, these projects of like growing food and connecting people are good, but if you really want to get a community behind you, you have to build up that buy-in, I guess, and that's one way to do it. Yeah, the goodwill. That's a good way of putting it. So I really enjoy that part. Do you have any thoughts on that, and like building community as you're going forward with these ideas?
Yeah, I mean, part of it, when we do a lot of these types of projects, and I, before I got totally disenfranchised, I had worked in the nonprofit sector, actually running greenhouses. And there's a lot of work. Even if you love agriculture, there's just a ton of work in any of these types of projects. Absolutely. And I think it's really important to take some time away from that and to remind people why we're doing it, other than like the I guess selfish sense of like, I feel good because I'm helping other people. Like, we need to celebrate the fact that we are a community, and that's what we're trying to build. That it's not just about feeding people, but recentering our community on how we live. And that's the part I think gets lost sometimes in a lot of these bigger projects, is we get bogged down with meetings and goals and what we're trying to accomplish in the day-to-day, that we never take that time to celebrate ourselves and our work and our community in its existence. And otherwise, you just burn out, and it becomes just a job, or it becomes something that you learn to hate or get disenfranchised from, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, there definitely has to be that balance there too, because people can really throw themselves into projects, especially when they see a critical need, to the point where like burnout becomes a big thing, especially if people are trying to take too much on their own shoulders. So I think
And I think to just expand on that a little bit, with things like this, like growing food, what I think is hard for people to really wrap their head around is that there's no end date to these projects. It's not like, you know, you know, if we raise $100 million, we can end, you know, world hunger or whatever it might be. It's like, okay, we do this and then it's done, and then we can move on to the next thing.
Right.
And these like what they're talking about, these transition projects, are not about an end date. They're about changing everything. And part of everything is this celebratory component of understanding this is a part of who we are, and this is a part of our community, and we are a part of our community, and the community is a part of these projects, whether or not they want to be. And you know, trying to bring those things together is really crucial.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Yeah, and like you could have the best permaculture backyard that's ever been created, but if you're not a part of your community and something bad happens, that might not mean very much. And like the resilience, more than anything, is invested in the people, right? In all people that are in your community, not just a handful of people that are committed to it, but it really has to be a whole community integrated thing. So that if bad things happen, if challenges are on the horizon, that you can stand a chance of facing it, because one person's not going to do it alone. It's kind of the difference between, like, you know, I do my part by recycling or you know, driving a fuel efficient car and stuff like that. Like, those things are okay to do, and they're definitely good, but they're never going to bring us across that finish line. We will never just consume our way to a sustainable or resilient future. It takes an entire network of community members working together to really stand any chance.
Yeah.
So, All right.
Deceptive if this film gave the impression that transition always works and is always glitteringly, dazzlingly successful. Sometimes individual projects or different initiatives or the entire organisation will fall to bits acrimoniously, or just maybe they run out of steam.
We can have a rosy vision that if we all have the same dream, we'll all get on, and it's not going to be true. Difference and conflict is always going to come into our groups.
If I'm absolutely honest, it was horrible. I won't go into the full details of it because some of it's quite private, but it had an absolutely horrible ending to it. I was very scarred by some of the things that had been said and very, very upset at some of the abuse that had been hurled around. And quite upset at myself that I think by the end of it I was pretty equally willing to get quite engaged in being not very nice. Gosh, if this is the people that are coming together trying to save the world, get me off this planet, I don't want to be here, because we ain't got a hope, and maybe we are probably all completely misguided and naive and a bit stupid.
And if we can get through it and be open to learning, it's transformational. You know, it can really help us the next time to do it better.
I think what became learnt, was when a new group did arise, we realised that the most important thing, beyond saving the planet or beyond whatever, peak oil, was that people really focused on being able to hear each other and have respect for each other's view, not necessarily agree with it and be able to say we don't agree, but to tolerate and consider relations between people as the primary thing.
I think one of the things that inner transition kind of points to, and one of the ways it can really help people, is by providing support structures, providing spaces where people talk about just how it is to be carrying responsibility in this work of transition.
For me, I mean, because we're not in Transition Town Incorporated, there's no line manager sort of giving you a pat on the back. So for people who are running things, I think it's good to have peer supports, other people that are like yourself who can, you know, hear what you've been up to and who understand the problems that you're facing. It's very tiring being at the front of what you're doing, or feeling that you're at the front of what you're doing, and you can forget why you're doing it. But there's something about going back to the emotional pool, the emotional source that reminds you why you're doing it and puts you back in touch with that drive in a very good way, you know, and you feel happy about it again, you know, rather than on a treadmill.
I think it's absolutely fundamental. I think transition calls for everybody to step into a different level of leadership.
So just to answer that question in the chat there, Seize the Mini said, I'm unfamiliar with transition city Lancaster. Was it, or is it an attempt at an intentional community? In a way, it is similar to the idea of creating intentional communities. That's what these transition movements are about. But I think, without knowing too many of the specific details of that particular chapter, what all these transition towns are about is creating a community that can push a city or even just that local community towards being more resilient when it comes to things like climate catastrophe, supply line shutdowns, any sort of catastrophic thing that a city can face, and really work towards a world where things are more resilient, basically. So I don't know too much about that particular chapter, but that's what I gather about transition towns in general. So, did you have anything you wanted to add to this last part here, Andy? Or
about what we've watched, or about Lancaster? Because I don't know anything about Lancaster.
Yeah, then about what we just watched. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny they ended up talking about what I was talking about with my own experiences running a nonprofit, about that the burnout from doing this work and feeling like if you don't do it, everything falls apart, and it probably has some very similar experiences just because of the fact of the nature of the work. Obviously, nonprofits come with a whole host of other issues. But yeah, I mean, it's like we just were saying, the importance of building those communities and the work that you're doing being framed within that community and not as this like entity that is like, you know, punching a wall trying to break through to make change, and instead thinking about being a part of the community instead.
Absolutely.
Is super important.
Yeah. Critical to keep that in mind, that it's about a community, not just a collection of individuals. So yeah, you can be doing things really well on paper. You could be meeting a lot of your goals, and you could still end up failing, as these people did for their first attempt, because they ignored that critical human component, that interpersonal relationships are an important part of it, and feeling like you're part of a community is an important part of it, not just the work that you all are setting out to do.
Sure. And one thing I would say is too, what's interesting to me about this documentary, up to this point, we're halfway through and they haven't talked about politics at all, which is interesting. And
it is.
I'm very curious to see if that's one of the things that tore that group apart. Is bringing
That
up
might
like, very
be.
political components of, you know, I think about like the trad movement. You know, there's a lot of overlap in terms of like the localization that this type of project is working on, which is I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not openly, you know, leftist or anarchist or anything like that, but there's clearly an undercurrent that exists within it. And again, there's that localization. There's a lot of overlap with a lot of right-wing movements. So I kind of wonder if that may have played a role in tearing that organization apart.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, even in permaculture more broadly, there tends to be two distinct veins of it. There's the people that do want to form community and you know, are at least liberal leaning, if not completely leftist, but do believe in a more egalitarian world and providing food for everybody, and want just a better community to weather whatever storms there are. And then there's this other almost completely separate strain that is more like right-wing libertarians who just care about prepping and you know, surviving the apocalypse and all this survivalist sort of rhetoric and mentality, and they tend not to get along with one another.
And if you're old enough to remember the days of pre-Facebook, when like the Permies forum was like the only place to like talk to people with similar interests, and it was all right wingers. I didn't know there was anyone on the left in like any agriculture until probably like, I would say 4 years ago.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So it's been pretty cool to see this become a thing. Whereas I felt like I was like hiding when I was involved, and like people would just say the craziest shit. If you ever want to see how wild people can be, go check out the Permies forum.
I've never really spent all that much time there. I used to listen to Paul Wheaton's podcast a lot, but and he's really good at hiding his politics. I tend to have an idea of what they are, but I don't actually know for sure what he believes.
He's super right wing. He's gotten better about hiding it, but back in the day, it was very clear.
That's really unfortunate, but not surprising.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah,
pretty much all the major ones, unfortunately.
Really, really.
Yeah, so, you know, Ben Falk is the opposite, but I won't go into it.
Sure.
So, but yeah, so it's interesting to see how this plays out, to circle back on without this idea of politics being tied up in it. And again, I'm very interested to know more explicitly about this organization and how they try to I don't want to say train, but like build a network without being something that's so political, without really explicitly being political.
Yeah, because I mean, at some point you think they'd have to just confront that the capitalist form is dependent on exploiting resources and people around the world, and
or simply like if there's a local election coming up,
Right.
And, if somebody that's involved and has the time to do this, they're probably also getting involved with local politics.
That's a very good point.
There's a letter next to their name when they run. How does that frame up the conversations in the group?
Very good point. Yeah. And having listened to a little bit more of Rob Hopkins, the founder of this Transition Towns movement, I know that he definitely walks things right up to a leftist perspective. He never explicitly says, I embrace anarchism or communism or anything like that, but he does talk about things like mutual aid and relying on community and all this stuff that is very left adjacent, but he never quite walks it across that. And I wonder if that's strategic or if that's just where he's at and he just hasn't quite made it to the left yet. So
yeah, it's possible.
Definitely. All right, let's continue on.
The leaders of different projects can get together, support each other, network with each other, and maybe even learn some skills they can take back to their own groups. There's something a bit magical about it, and it reconnects me to why I'm doing this in the first place. And now I feel like I've got a really strong support network. It's turned into much more than what I thought it would be.
Third stage is connecting, and that's where once you're up and running, you start to really reach out into the wider community, to the organisations and the people you might not normally have come into contact with at that stage, the local council, local businesses, the wider community. So connecting is really a stage which is about embedding the project much more deeply in the community and making it much more relevant to as many people as you can.
Nell'estate del 2008 ho tenuto il mio primo Transition Talk a Monteveglio. Ho invitato una trentina di persone che pensavo potessero essere interessate e quello che è successo dopo è che chi è intervenuto ha voluto approfondire.
È stata un'esperienza che mi ha visto nella prima riunione rimanere veramente scioccato rispetto a quelle che erano le informazioni che ci venivano date.
Diversi mesi più tardi eravamo tutti molto più consapevoli di quando avevamo cominciato. Qualcuno di noi ha pensato di proseguire il percorso all'interno del gruppo guida di Monteveglio Città di Transizione, altri come Umberto e Daniele hanno pensato di candidarsi alle elezioni per il Consiglio Comunale. Hanno vinto e adesso sono il sindaco e l'assessore all'ambiente. Il risultato è che ci siamo ritrovati con un consiglio al cui interno c'erano due persone molto consapevoli rispetto a tutte le tematiche della transizione, e anche gli altri avevano un'idea piuttosto chiara delle sfide che avremmo dovuto affrontare negli anni successivi.
Cioè, come fa un amministratore di una città di 5.000 abitanti a prendere atto della crisi del modello di sviluppo crescita limitata, della fine dell'economia del petrolio e a indirizzare delle politiche? Il primo atto è stato quello di scriverlo nero su bianco.
E così nasce una delibera ufficiale in cui l'amministrazione indica come politica prioritaria la fuoriuscita dall'economia dei combustibili fossili, prevedendo la stesura di un piano di decrescita energetica.
Spesso ci chiedono come abbiamo fatto a costringere i nostri politici a firmare una delibera così impegnativa. La cosa bella è che non c'è stato bisogno di convincere nessuno, non abbiamo dovuto fare nessun tipo di pressione.
Noi abbiamo già ottenuto risultati molto importanti a mio modo di vedere. Uno tra tutti è quello di una decisa inversione di rotta relativamente a tutto il tema urbanistico.
Lavorare fianco a fianco con l'amministrazione permette ovviamente di fare cose che se no sarebbero impossibili. Un esempio è il progetto Enescom, un progetto europeo che porterà i 6 comuni della vallata all'adesione al patto dei sindaci e che ci consentirà di scrivere i piani di decrescita energetica per tutto questo territorio.
Se poi queste politiche si fanno avendo dietro dei ragionamenti come quelli che ha fatto il Comune di Monteveglio sull'aumento di resilienza e sulla fuoriuscita da un'economia basata sul petrolio, l'adesione dell'intero territorio al patto dei sindaci diventa ancora più interessante.
Il patto dei sindaci è un programma europeo che mira alla riduzione delle emissioni di CO2 e allo sviluppo di energie più sostenibili e rinnovabili. È un buono strumento per la transizione perché consente di tenere assieme le persone e gli amministratori nello stesso processo. Quindi a Monteveglio vediamo succedere quello che già accade in tante altre città di transizione. In più c'è questo forte coinvolgimento del livello istituzionale, che speriamo possa portarci a cambiare la realtà delle cose un po' più in fretta.
What's really fascinating is what it starts to look like when that bottom-up approach that is transition meets an engaged, proactive local authority who are also thinking in terms of localisation and resilience. And that interface where those two things meet is really, really important and fascinating area that's starting to emerge. How can a council best support the transition process rather than drive it? How can they embed an awareness of peak oil and the need to build resilience into the work that they do, and what do those two things look like when they come together?
I think that one of the last sentences he said there was really critical. How can the council support the transition towns movement without just completely co-opting it? And I think there is a danger once you get to the point where you're trying to influence even local government to adopt these sorts of changes, is that they may want to just come in and take things over, and they might draw a lot of your volunteers along with them if they do start putting out their own initiatives. Like they showed a walk to school initiative. I mean, that's cool, and that's great and stuff, but it isn't necessarily the most critical thing for a town to do, and it isn't necessarily where you as a group have envisioned things to go. So just, there's a danger in that, because you got to keep in mind that all the government in capitalist countries is oriented towards capital and capitalists. So just something to keep in mind. That's what I think.
Absolutely. And especially when we're talking about organizing or collaborating or whatever with the government, it's important to understand that it's important to consider, rather, where the power continues to exist for those projects.
Right.
If governments want to support a project, that's fine, as long as we don't give up power to that government to manage it or something like that. So that's a really important nuance in those integrations, or whatever term you might want to use for that collaboration. So this town in particular, I looked it up because I was curious, and I can't find any evidence that the solar panel project ever went up. But oddly enough, the solar company advertises that they're going to do it in a bunch of brochures that you can still find online.
Wow.
But I've never found anything that's like, hey, they did this thing. And this documentary is what, 10 years old now?
Yeah, I think this one, let me just check real quick.
I think I read 2011.
Yeah, 2013, so it's coming up on 10 years old, yeah.
Yeah, so if they were going to do that project, it would be done by now.
You would think so.
So that, it speaks to, again, what you were just saying, that co-optation of movements. The guy that was elected mayor is very leftist. I looked him up as well. But he's no longer the mayor, and I'm sure there's a reason. So.
But yeah, very important. Definitely the worst case scenario would be to put all this activities and all this work together, only to have it be co-opted, and then even worse than that, used to get brownie points for companies that aren't actually doing the projects that they're touting. So yeah.
Is there anything more American?
Yeah, really. Except for this is Spain, but yeah. Apparently they've taken a note out of our playbook, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Transition Together was originally conceived here in Totnes through the Transition Town Totnes initiative as a way of engaging people in a street-by-street kind of a way.
So a group usually starts by somebody coming into the office or ringing us up and saying they're interested in starting up a group in their neighbourhood, and they are the ones who then actually go and recruit all their neighbours. So that is something that's a bit different about our project. We don't go out and knock on people's doors. They're the one who does it. So they usually get together between about 6 and 10 of their neighbours, and they then go through 7 sessions. So they have 7 meetings together. The first one we facilitate. We send somebody along just to help them get off on the right track and to set a schedule of when they're going to be meeting again. And then the second session looks at energy use in the home. So there's about 10 to 12 practical actions that they can take, none of which cost much money at all. So we're really focusing on no cost or low cost actions for people. And then at the end of that first session, they write a little action plan, and each person usually takes on 2 or 3 actions that they say they're going to do or try and do before they meet again.
Lots of things we were able to put into practice about how to save energy and how to be better users of the resources that are on this planet, really, without suffering, actually without suffering. And that's the key. It was actually a fun thing to do.
Because it looks at it on a street-by-street level, it means people can start to imagine the implications of that and start to think about what a post-oil, low-carbon world's going to look like on a small scale. It's not about how are we going to imagine the world totally changed. It's how can we imagine this bit of the world? How can we imagine that transformed and made over? And that feels much more digestible.
By applying the things that we read about in the units, talked about, made a big difference. It's been more a sense of how we are in our lives rather than what we're doing, being more aware, being more conscious of what we're doing with our lives in regard to energy and wasting it or not wasting it and doing our best.
I think the long-term benefits of the group aspect in particular is really around the social cohesion.
Because it's a bunch of people that I wouldn't normally particularly have any cause to have anything to do with, so it's brought us together in, we're such a mishmash of people. It's lovely, but we've all got this sort of thing, this thread in common which keeps us as a group and keeps us meeting. It's really brought a great sense of community to the street.
Before we move on to that, this just strikes me as one of those things where, yes, each of these individual actions is probably a good thing, and probably they can measure a lot of the change community-wide in lowering their power consumption, lowering their energy bills, using water more wisely. All these are good things for individuals to do, but the way they're coming at it is it strikes me as just a very individuated thing. Like, they're like, what can you do in your household? And it even almost seems like that community aspect is just like a group of people that get together to talk about how they can do things in their own private lives, which again is fine. It's just not exactly what we need entirely. There has to be more social cohesion than just we're all a bunch of homeowners and we like saving energy. Like that it has to be more than that. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, it doesn't change how many power plants there are.
Exactly. So good job, y'all. But like, maybe keep digging a little bit more into trying to, they said a wide swath of people, and I mean, really, they showed a bunch of white middle class ladies walking around the street together. So it makes me a bit skeptical if that's the best they could come up with for their B-roll and whatnot.
Yeah, sorry, Grandma, you're not cutting it.
Yeah. But again, like I don't mean to push these people away and downplay what they're doing as much as just say that it's perhaps the wrong orientation. And if you oriented it more towards building community and providing for each other's needs, rather than just saving a bit and using a bit less, then I think it's more of a movement that has staying power. Because like, what do you do once everyone has their most advanced thermal insulation, and they all have their solar panels, and they all have a rain barrel to catch the rainwater, so they don't have to have a sprinkler system? Once you've done all these individual actions, what then? What really is keeping the group together at that point?
Yeah, what do you talk about?
Right. What do you do? So, yeah.
Yeah, to answer the question about liberal,
yeah,
I wouldn't. So, like, while I think we define, at least here in the United States, liberals with these actions, I think that's, in my experience as somebody that does spend a lot of time overseas, that really isn't the case. It's only here in the U.S. where people don't give a shit, or explicitly don't give a shit about the environment, that they go out of their way to not do these types of things. Whereas I think it's more of a class-related thing more than anything. It's expendable income. It's owning a home, as you were saying. These are a bunch of people that can own a home and have the free time to do these expendable projects that may save them money in the long run, but cost money up front. And that's only available to certain classes of people. And
Absolutely.
having that certain class reduce their consumption by even, say, 50% when they consume, 30 times, 100 times, whatever it might be, most of the world, isn't really a solution.
The environment is cool, but what about brunch? A very good world eating.
I mean, brunch is good. That's the point.
But what if we could imagine that brunch being hyper-locally sourced and available to everyone regardless of ability to pay? Hey, maybe we'd really have something then.
More brunch.
But yeah, I think more than just the term liberal, I think perhaps American neoliberal with a bit of class power. That definitely seems to fit more what this last project was comprised of, at least in my short, just that last little vignette analyzing what they're about.
Yeah, people that may have secretly voted for Boris Johnson, but they told you they didn't.
Right. They didn't want the social stigma points of voting for a buffoon.
They understand why they shouldn't, but they did anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure they justified it that he was really shaking things up and doing things differently. All that stuff. Yes, their heart is in the right place, and I think there definitely is potential with these people to pull them into an actual leftist position. Maybe, they definitely have a huge vested financial interest in believing in neoliberalism and private property and all of this sort of thing, but at the same time, yeah, they got that conscience. So if you really wanted to include these people in your particular movement, maybe focus on that part of it. Be like, yeah, this is great for you. What about for the people that don't have access to this stuff? At least start making them think leftward of where they're at. I think that could be a strategy for sure.
See that creativity spark, and people start looking at each other's gardens in different ways and looking at each other's rooftops as having great potential. And I think probably in the long run, that's the change that will stick.
It's what society needs, what we all need, is to live in a safe world. And I think this is a start for it.
And the fourth stage is building, and building is about that step of starting to think strategically about the localization of the place that you live. It's the stage where you start setting up energy companies, setting up local currencies, setting up social enterprises. So it's where it moves from lots of ideas into making a very tangible push at creating a new infrastructure locally.
Well, there's been a greengrocers here on this site for a long, long time.
I've been shopping here at least 50 years.
Certainly since the war, I think, it's been a greengrocery business here. The business was running down. It was looking increasingly like it was going to close. So we started talking to him about how we might take over and run the shop as some sort of community business. The community-owned approach was a very deliberate move for ethical reasons, I suppose, and also very practical reasons. We wanted people to use the shop. What better way to get them to use the shop than to give them ownership of the shop?
The local food side of things we didn't do before, which is what we're all about now. So people actually just come in with, and I say, I've got 6 cauliflowers, do you want them? and as long as they're good quality, we'll take it off them.
Get this. I know, it's marvellous.
Local rhubarb.
We love this.
Because I actually have customers that come into the shop specifically asking for giggle rhubarb.
It's part of the rhubarb triangle, because we want to encourage people to grow more stuff. We want to develop that whole thing and enable our community to become a bit more resilient.
This is the 1350 which we've got for selling our produce, and we recycle it back into the shop here. And I would expect we'll spend more, which is the usual.
We've added a lot of value to the community. We've created jobs. We've enabled more people to do all their shopping locally. We've improved the business of other retailers around here by being here. It's because more people are now choosing to shop locally rather than drive off to a supermarket or something, so they're spending more money in other shops as well as in here, which is great. I'm really pleased that it's been as successful as it has been. Yeah, it might not have been like this, it could have been very different, I'm sure. And right from the outset as well, we've done the bread, which is something really quite special. It was sort of a marriage made in heaven, really, the two businesses, both cooperatives, because the bakery is a worker cooperative where we're a consumer cooperative, I guess.
I think things like a worker co-op structure means you're much more connected with the people you work with. You know, I've had colleagues all my working life, but it's not the same thing. This is a different level of interconnectedness.
Want to pause it for 1 second here. So be aware of that last thing that grocer said, that this bread shop, this bakery, is a worker-owned cooperative, whereas his establishment was a community-owned cooperative. So again, it's that kind of it's an okay thing to do, to have a community co-op. I was a member of a community co-op for a long time. And it is great that a lot of the things they do, the local food initiatives, and they do tend to pay better than your standard grocery store, but you don't have that control as a worker. It's controlled by everyone. You know, shares are available to anybody. So again, it might be a good thing, but I think definitely a lot better would be that what we're going to look at now is a worker-owned cooperative, where there's more of a democratic say in the way things go.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, it's really worth understanding and thinking about, especially with things where there are share purchases. Who are the kind of people that can afford share purchases?
Right, because even the food co-op that I was a part of, the share purchase was like $75, which if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you probably don't got that at any given point. Whereas worker-owned, just by being an employee, you get a share in decision-making. That's not to say that everything works out great just because it's a worker cooperative, but there's definitely a much better chance of getting things like fair pay, of having good working conditions, being able to set your own schedule. You at least have some control over it. So I would say that should be more what we're shooting for if we are going to get to the stage of coming together as a transition towns network or whatever movement you're trying to form, and get to the point of starting any sort of business initiative, because it could be a powerful thing. It could be a thing that does bring needed resources to a community. Like there's plenty of places in the Twin Cities here that are pretty impoverished and are basically food deserts. They don't have access to fresh produce or, fresh anything really. Certainly not at an affordable price. So that could be a way that you move to addressing those needs even further. But you should really do it in the right way, a way that keeps things from the bottom up, rather than just giving everything over, like having all this grassroots effort, building up your transition towns movement or whatever, only to give it over to a top-down sort of traditional business model. That doesn't make sense to me. So keep with the bottom up. That's what I'm trying to say.
We started the bakery just over 3 years ago now. We managed to get together a group of about 60 families who paid upfront for their bread, sometimes up to 12 months at a time, and the longer they subscribe for, the bigger the discount we offer them. There was such enthusiasm in the community that we just knew we were onto a winner, basically. And then realised we'd run out of room in our little 15 square metre cupboard, so thought we had to take the big plunge this time and look for our own premises. And still we didn't have any working capital to do it, so we had to think again about how we might finance this. It wasn't our idea, it was actually an Andrew Whitley suggestion, and it had been bandied around other places about the idea of the concept of a bread bond. So a series of individual loans from our customers and people in our community on which we would pay interest to them. We pay them a good rate of interest, 6.25%, but it was payable in bread, which equates to £2.50 a week, which equates to a loaf of bread a week.
So look at that. Look at this initiative that came out of this worker-owned cooperative. They still have capital needs because they're still operating in a capital marketplace. But instead of just allowing more people to take more shares of their company away from the workers, they're paying them basically in labor and a little bit of material. They're paying back that loan to them. So this is an alternative way that you can get things financed if you don't have any of the sort of startup capital that traditionally you need to start any sort of a business in say the US or the UK.
Yeah, this is super cool. When I was watching it, I was like, I'm mad I didn't think of it before.
No, really. Really.
I was like, oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. And it ends up costing the business a lot less in the long run because materials are always going to be like the cheapest part of things. Paying for your rent, paying for your employees, paying compensation, that sort of thing. These are going to be your major expenses, but the materials themselves, that difference in markup that they're not having to charge too. It's just, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really your interest is the interest that they're paying is the labor.
Right, right.
It's
Absolutely.
that labor component and the cost that they don't have to pay, the taxes, FICA and all those other things that go along with the income that they make that they have to pay off to be able to pay interest.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's cutting out a lot of middlemen.
Very good point as well. Yeah, you're not having to deal with traditional sources of capital like a bank or even a credit union that's going to charge you exorbitant interest on a loan. So yeah, that's another big benefit too. So Martin Pirate says this sort of thing helps against the privilege issue if you see often with open shareholder projects. That's a good point as well. You still have to have a certain amount of extra money laying around to invest in this sort of thing. But there's definitely other ways they could formulate things where instead of giving them a direct loan, they could give them a little bit of labor in exchange for a bunch of bread or something like that. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But yeah, I'm sure there's ways to even make it even more accessible to allow even more of the community to invest in this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially quasi-bartering. It's some middle ground between bartering and traditional capital-driven economics.
For sure.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity that's available in this kind of space that we just have to be creative to challenge current systems within.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said. So World Eater says, as someone who can't bake to save their life, I will always back the bakers. Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, and there's always those skills. You can't have every single skill, so we're still going to have to rely on a degree of specialization in this world. But yeah, it's good to know that you can be supportive of people that have the skills that you still need for your survival, without necessarily having to be uber wealthy or some sort of capital investor or something like that. So that is cool to see.
So you only get people that are committed to this place and this business, and it's actually a very cheap loan for us, and a very good rate of return for them. You can't get a better rate of return on that kind of small investment anywhere from a high street bank. Reconnecting with food is a fantastic metaphor for reconnecting with everything else in your life.
At the moment, every time we pay our energy bills, all that money just leaves our community. Its ability to make things happen, make transition happen, is lost. And it's really exciting to see now the number of communities that are starting to set up their own energy companies in such a way that energy is generated, but it benefits the community, it brings money back in.
We are the first community-owned solar power station in the country, in Britain. That makes us feel pretty proud. The solar power station is a rather grand term for a 98 kilowatt peak array, but we've calculated that it's enough for about 40 houses, 40 homes at current consumption rates.
Just pausing quickly for the chat there. So Lucky Mortal 1 says workers should own the means of production, worker co-ops, but owner co-ops have a role helping white people suck less. I think you're talking about like the community-owned co-ops. Is that what you're talking about? It definitely does have a role, for sure. But I think we should be focused more, especially if it's an enterprise coming out of some sort of grassroots movement. We should definitely be focusing more if we're going to take that step into the business world of making things more fair and equitable to the employees, because that too will help white people suck less. And you say they just shouldn't get so big that they start exploiting employees. Well, it doesn't really take that big of a scale to start exploiting employees. I mean, there's that kind of romanticized soft spot that Americans have for like the mom and pop business, the small entrepreneur. They can exploit their employees pretty awfully as well. I know plenty of people who've had terrible stories about small-time owners. Like I worked for a Dairy Queen once that was a franchise and was owned by just a guy and his wife, and he was not kind to his employees at all. Did not pay them well, and was very harsh on them for any little infraction. So it doesn't take size to be exploitative, is what I'm trying to say. And then Food Not Class says, if we automate most of the co-op, we'll have much more time for brunch. really focusing on that brunch aspect.
Maybe it's a co-op for brunch.
It could be a brunch co-op. You
Not
know.
against it.
Definitely. Yeah, corner that market right now. Get in early.
The same bread. Like it's a win-win.
For sure. But a note about automation too. When it's a worker-owned cooperative, automation isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you're probably bringing in more revenue than you were before, and yet you as an individual have the chance to decide where that extra revenue goes, as your equal voting share of that company. And it might translate to people just working less overall. You could decide that, hey, maybe an 8-hour day for each of us is not something we want. Let's automate this little aspect of it, and we can all work less and still make the same amount of money overall. So, I mean, that's really where the power of worker-owned cooperative starts to really show itself. But let's continue on.
We're not going to be able to power Lewis by means of solar panels, but there are all kinds of other ways that we can do it. It has the advantage of being easy, quick, cheap, instant, and unproblematic in terms of planning. We asked Harvey's, the brewery, if they would be willing to lease us their roof. They said yes, in principle fine, as long as we dot the I's and cross the T's on all the legal side. We had the launch in the town. We'd advertised it very extensively. We'd been in the local press, making sure that everybody knew about it. The money started coming in. We started getting checks through the door with the application forms, and in a very short space of time, I think it was 3 weeks, we had more than we needed to fund the installation.
It's real community investment, so it gives something back to the community. People get it, it's very straightforward,
and also the fact it's doing great things for the environment. It's saving us on our carbon emissions, but it's locally owned. It's local people coming together and doing it.
It's a very interesting precedent to set, because what it shows is that people power is actually the effective power in terms of community fundraising and community projects.
Such a good seed for lots of other potential community activities. You know, it does demonstrate the community to get together in areas that even 10 years ago they wouldn't have thought possible.
If you have a renewable energy installation of any kind, you will get paid by the government for every unit of electricity you generate. We're accumulating from the feed-in tariff revenue a lump sum out of which we can repay people's initial payments. It's been a very difficult process for us. I'm a composer. I'm not a businessman. I'm not a financial anything. I've had to learn an enormous amount in a very short space of time, and we all have. Nobody should go into this with any kind of illusions about the amount of effort, the amount of commitment, and the amount of time that it takes to do it. It is difficult. Resilient communities are the future. That's where we're headed. So it's all about having the structures in place locally to be able to supply the needs of the community. The models that we're pioneering are models that can eventually be adopted in some form by people in other communities in other parts of the world.
Okay. So I'm not sure I understand all the details of the way this is structured, but at least on the surface, it seems like a little bit more of a promising enterprise for actually helping the community than just individual homeowners, buying solar panels together or putting it up on their individual houses and that sort of thing. This strikes me as more of a community project than some of the other stuff that we've been seeing. What's your reaction to this, Andy?
So where I live, at least here in the Northeast, community-owned electric not necessarily cooperatives, but like owned by the town, generally have better rates and better maintenance. I'm assuming that would further extend with something like this. Not that solar usually has a ton of maintenance involved.
Sure.
But I think that I think it's a cool idea of actually taking stock of energy use and having a more I don't want to say like there's a better understanding of why it's important to reduce consumption that doesn't just affect you personally and your electric bill, but the communities need to outsource and to essentially exist in some capacity as an autonomous organization. Yeah, definitely so. So, yeah, many ways these sorts of projects can be structured. It's important to keep in mind to keep that community, that grassroots level at the heart of whatever you do, and you're going to have a better chance of producing long-lasting results that actually do bind your community together a little bit better. Let's go back to that view, and we'll continue on.
You can think of the economy of the place that you live as being like a big bucket, and into that bucket go pensions, wages, grants and so on. But at the moment, things like supermarkets, paying our electricity bills, internet shopping are all drilling holes into that bucket. That means that our accumulated wealth and its potential are just draining away. And everywhere that there's a leak in that bucket is a potential local livelihood, potential local business, or training opportunity for young people. So things like supporting community energy companies, supporting local food where it's available and boosting that where it isn't, and using local currencies are all very skillful ways of plugging the leaks in that bucket.
Brixton is the most diverse culturally place in the UK. It's unique. We have every single nation under the sun.
We started the Brixton Plan, it launched in 2009. Now we've reached a number of about 200 businesses taking it officially.
Tonight, with it going electronic, we are the first area in the
whole of the United Kingdom to have e-currency. Is that not okay?
We're now advancing into a digital age with the pound.
I just think it's another wonderful incentive for people to come down to Brixton Market and come to Brixton in general and give it a think and spend their money. Absolutely. Thank you.
The New Economics Foundation, a Dutch organisation called Coin, and Transition Network have been developing the software to actually launch this kind of electronic currency. But Brixton is the first pilot where it's actually being tested in practice.
Comment in chat there from Lucky Mortal. This one's a rough call. Community-owned means of energy production, but still exploits labor. I guess the community could buy the asset installation from an independent worker-owned contractor and then just own the asset and manage it collectively. That is one possibility. You could also have a worker-owned energy cooperative that still has buy-in from the local community. Just because you have worker ownership, it doesn't mean you can't still raise capital for investments and all these sorts of things through, just like what the bakery did, they selling shares of future bread. They don't have the people that buy those shares don't have an actual controlling stake in the company, but they still have a means of investing that doesn't involve a bank and doesn't involve these traditional forms of capital control and that sort of thing. Do we have worker-owned solar install cooperatives? I'm not sure of any. I see you're trying to put a link there. I don't allow links in the chat just to help keep the community safe, because I don't have any mods or anything yet to help me out there. But you can always whisper me any sort of link you want, and I can repost it for you if you like as well. I don't know if there's any worker-owned solar install cooperatives. That would be an interesting thing to look into.
I believe they do. They're small. There's a lot of small electrical companies, and they're, in my experience, a little bit more likely to be interested in alternative models of business. So they definitely exist, but I'm not sure, what kind of scale they can work at, and buying things like solar panels to then resell to somebody that they're going to install for, or whatever it might be. A lot of solar companies like Sonova actually outsource the install and maintenance, so they don't even technically work for the company. So the solar install company is usually a small local company, and again, a lot of times they're a little bit more open to having those cooperative models or shareholder models or whatever it might be, some mixed bag of private investor money / shareholders that are employees.
That's cool. That's very cool. Wasn't aware of that. And yeah, you too, Andy. If you have any links that you want me to share, just send me a message and I'll put it up in the chat as well. So, it looks like I'm getting a bot army that's coming and following me. So I may have to take a couple minutes to take care of that. But I'm just going to keep playing the video for now, and we'll pause after this section here again.
Hi there.
Hello there.
How's it going?
Oh, not too bad.
So I just wanted you to have a quick look at my watch.
You want me to fix it for you?
Yeah, just have a quick look at it. See if it's
Right, I'll just get
just
the
seems to-
special
All
watch
right.
fixing tool out. And right, no problem. Let's have a look. Let's see what we've got here. Right, well, I reckon that's going to be a new battery in that one.
okay.
How's
Great.
that?
Lovely.
There you go, and it's working.
Lovely. So
It's £2.50.
£2.50. Right. Can I pay by text? Is
You
that all right?
certainly may. Absolutely.
So just go to the Brixton Bank, and you're Stuart
the Watchman.
So it's STW. You got on? Yeah, got the
Ticking
message.
away nicely.
Lovely. All right then.
Yep, got me message. Job done.
Lovely. Thanks very much
Fantastic.
then.
There
Thanks,
you go.
Stuart.
See you next time.
See ya. Thank
Bye bye. See ya.
What we've developed, which is a pay-by-text system, can be used by anyone with no hardware at all. I mean, you don't need a swipe card machine. All you need is a mobile phone. And it doesn't need to be a smartphone, it's just a very simple, basic mobile phone to send a text, and that's all you need.
Can I pay by text?
Yeah, you can.
So what's your username?
It's Sana
Sana
Foods.
Foods.
Yes, Sana Foods.
Our local independent businesses are absolutely crucial to resolving the economic problems that we've got at the moment, because small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of the British economy. And the thing about the Brixton pound is, the whole ethos of it is about us spending our money locally and turbocharging our local businesses so they thrive and prosper.
The importance of the Brixton pound isn't about shifting money from, say, North London to South London. It's about creating a different type of economy. So one where we're actually asking questions like, can we supply things locally? Are there people that live locally that could fulfil this role? And can we do things a bit differently? So it's about actually having a sort of economy where everybody can have a role, can have a job, and where we can have a really thriving, diverse type of strong local economy.
Fantastic.
Information centre.
Lovely.
£3 to read. Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, then. Great.
Have a good day. See you again. Bye. And there you go. The Brixton pound. Electronic. Fantastic.
All right. So people are talking about how they're gonna love the Bitcoin. That's what World Leader says. And yeah, it's funny. I'm pretty sure this was before Bitcoin was even thought of at that point. But when you look at it, you know, at more than just a superficial level, what they're trying to do is completely the opposite of what Bitcoin or a Dogecoin or any of those sort of cryptocurrencies are doing. Those are all just financial tools. It's one more thing to bet on in the stock market. What they're just the whole purpose of their local currency is just to keep money in circulating within the city. So it's not good. It's not traded on the world market. It's not as though you can buy a Brixton. I'm pretty sure you couldn't buy like a Brixton pound if you don't live in Brixton, or you just have no reason to, because it's only good in stores, you know, that accept it there. So it's kind of an opposite way of looking at all those cryptocurrencies. I don't know how effective it is. It's not one of those things that I've ever researched too much myself.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's like, you know, you have to transfer money into the currency, and then the idea is that it's too much work to transfer out of the currency, so you're just going to shop at their local version. You know, if there's a store on the town line, you're going to go to the one in town versus the one in the next town over, or just the local shops that accept it. But I'm not really sure if it's really a solution, because you know, if you go to a local grocery store, just to pick one, all the canned goods don't come from that town. Like, the money is still leaving. You know, the structure still exists for that extraction of money. You're just slowing the process down a little bit, not really challenging it, at least in my perspective.
Yeah. So yeah, it's more like a stopgap than a real, you know, final destination for a solution. So yeah, that's a good point as well. So you asked if someone in the chat asked if that Brixton pound that is still in operation. It looks like they are. As of 2021, they say, we are delighted to be working with the Algorand Foundation, which I don't have no idea who that is, on the next chapter of the Brixton Pound story. 2021 will see us reinvent the Brixton Pound, layering all we have learned in the last decade onto Algorand's unique blockchain. So there you go. Looks like they're moving towards the crypto route. Open source, trustless, and inclusive. It's an ecosystem developed solely to deliver public good. I mean, that sounds like a lot of, you know, platitudes and not really a lot of substance, but it's incredibly exciting. So they're still going.
Still trying.
But it looks like they might be moving more the national or global route, which would be unfortunate if they were just one more cryptocurrency. But hey, what can you do? They have David Bowie on their front page. As well for the Brixton pound. I
guess
no
things
idea.
aren't going so well for David Bowie.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Oh, so the Brixton pound has a limited Bowie print. I wonder if they actually manufactured paper currency at some point. I have no idea.
Ironically.
Yeah, really. But interesting. So yeah, local currencies. Maybe something worth looking into, but maybe not exactly where you want to spend your effort.
No, I think what would be cool, though, is if instead of having a currency, you know, I don't know what their currency is tied to. It's probably directly tied to the pound itself.
Yeah.
But if you had a currency that was tied to labor, So like every, let's say, pound was equal to 1 hour of labor, and that's how it was evaluated. I think that'd be a really interesting way to develop an economy, even if it was a local economy, in that it could be cashed for your skill set, or you could use it as currency, buying things. But also, your labor is 1 hour of whatever you do. I need an attorney, I can pay you $1 per whatever it comes out to be, or a baker, or whatever. It'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. And that would definitely foster a lot more community interaction if you're volunteering or working for your labor pound, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, that would be an interesting route to go. I wonder if anyone's tried that on any sort of even community-wide scale. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know. So Martin Pirate says the paper money is maybe more like a souvenir. That very well may be. Maybe just another way to invest a little bit in what they're trying to do and get a little memento to take away. I'm not really sure. Let's continue on.
Transition initially was designed really as a detox for the West, as a way for the more affluent West to reduce its emissions to meet the developing world coming up the other way. But it's been fascinating over the last year or so to see it start to emerge now in the developing world.
We started with our first village, which is Kotakarai, where we live. Our first goal is for the village, our homes, the families, to have access to nutritional food. That's the core of our program and our project, is everybody should have access to good quality food. We go to one house, we say, do you want to start a vegetable garden? We bring the seeds and we show you how to maintain it. And as soon as we start, then neighbors will come and say, okay, can we also have the same? And that's how we have been growing with this concept. It can bring very positive results working in the rural India. For example, if you say this is the size of a carbon footprint of a person living in US, okay? This is the size of a carbon footprint a person living in India, and this is the size of a carbon footprint of a person living in a rural India. So we don't have to come from all the way down to here, we're already here. We just have to adopt models where most of our practices are green practices, are renewable practices, and still keep the villages, the rural India, in rural India, so it will stop migration. We are bringing the transition from an old model of traditional village to a developed India, and find a balance where they don't feel they're left out not living in the cities. We're very happy to see smile on the faces of villagers. Like they are very welcoming us to open their heart and their house.
Yeah, and really cue the exotic music.
It was a bop.
Yeah, it was a bop. Well, I find that interesting, though. Again, we see another project that kind of really came up from the grassroots, came up from rural, likely more impoverished villages in India. And what do they focus on? Is helping people meet their basic needs of having nutritional food available to them. And it seems like they've been fairly successful at that, just getting gardens going. So yeah, I just find that interesting that when it comes from, I don't want to say the bottom, but from the lower class anyway, it tends to have a focus on real change and real material upliftment of the people, rather than just maybe fiddling around with the way we get our current huge energy needs met. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on this project?
It's just interesting the way they present it. As the comment said, cue the exotic music.
Yeah, really? Like, was that really necessary? Do we have to ease the timid white suburbanites into this sort of thing by saying, "Oh, don't be scared. It's got a jaunty beat to it." I don't know.
Might have heartburn. Watch out.
Yeah, I don't understand the purpose of that, but whatever. All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. We only got about 10 minutes to go.
From when we started doing transition, we always had the idea that it would be great if it was something that was able to sufficiently get into the culture, into the DNA and the bloodstream of a place, so that when it encounters times of great uncertainty or difficulty, that transition is one of the things on the table that people pick up and use to design their response. So it's been really interesting over the last year or so to see places where things have got really, really difficult, and where transition has become almost an instinctive central part of that community's response.
Even before the disaster, I thought like transition is the most wonderful thing I can do in my life. After the disaster, it made me so even more obvious that transition is just what we have to do. I have to do.
うちの電力は今メーリングリストに登録して情報を共有しているメンバーがだいたい80名から90名ぐらい。そもそもは311の地震と原発事故をきっかけにして立ち上がって、今の電気の在り方はどうなのか、これからの電気の在り方はどうなのかということを考えるような、そういう趣旨で集まってきたんだと思うんですが、今までいろいろと考えて話し合いもしてたんですけど、なかなか実際の行動には落とし込めてなかったようなところで、ああいう災難があって、そこで誰かが呼びかけたんですね。富士野電力っていうキーワードで僕たちにも何かできることがあるんじゃないか、その富士野電力っていうキーワードで一気に立ち上がった。光祭りというイベントをきっかけにして一気に具体的なステップに踏み出していった。今年第8回目で、今年については全部自然エネルギーでその祭りの電気を賄おうという趣旨で進んだんですね。だいたい延べ人数3日間で5000人ぐらい来場していただきましたけど、そういった規模のイベントを全て自然エネルギーでやったと。でその後はその光祭りのメンバーと、あと参加してくれたアーティストのみんな、可能な人だけだったですけど、東北の方に祭りを届けに行こうということで、そのようなところで電源供給をしてきました。それとは別にやっぱりこの自分たちの住む地域、地元を全て自然エネルギーで賄っていきたい。でそのためにじゃあこの富士野にはどんなエネルギーの可能性があるかなっていうと、ざっと浮かぶところではまずこの森ですね。でそれに合わせて小水力、山々は 深く谷を作っていって水の流れは強い場所がいくつかこの地域にあるので、これからそういう段取りが必要だよねというところを富士野電力の中で共有して、でもっと地域に広げてまた共有して、それで進めていくようなイメージを持って。
I was the Littleton Time Bank coordinator, and I'd been working as the coordinator for the past few years, building and connecting community. Time Bank was bought here as a complementary currency, people managing to find another way to live without constantly needing money, and at the same time it's this amazing community strengthening tool because people could trade in skills, get to know each other, meet their neighbours. Then we had this awful earthquake in September 2010. Civil Defence had been called through to Christchurch as it was deemed there wasn't any actual need here in Littleton. However, there was a need, but of a different kind, and the emergency services, as in the fire brigade, phoned us and said, we know that you're involved with the community, we don't know what you can do, but what can you do, can you help? So we set up base in our office, and we were very, very busy and frantic for many weeks helping meet community needs, such as delivering water and food and helping out with emergency repairs.
That's one thing to hold true.
We'd kind of just got on top of things just 2 weeks before the February earthquake hit, and it was different this time. It was faster, it was worse, all buildings were down, it was entirely different. It was like September was a practice run. We pulled together as a community, we found out what needed to be done, how we could get it through this database of Time Bank volunteers. At that time there was just over 400. We just got things in motion and sent out these emails. This is where we are, this is what we need. And people came in droves, and then they sent those emails out to their own databases and on Facebook pages, and we had so many volunteers coming in. It was absolutely incredible. I don't think the community would have pulled itself together as quickly as it did without the community time bank here.
This goes out to everyone who lost anything but found each other, because the true heart of a community is its people.
Okay, so we can see how having that community organization together before things go bad, before a disaster strikes, can really be an asset to shaping how things go forward, and not only in being able to manage the disaster as it continues to unfold, but really being a force for rebuilding and that sort of thing. So even if it's not a transition towns group that you're organizing, having any sort of organization on the ground that is dealing with people's daily needs and basic needs puts you in a good position. There's that group, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, that was pretty instrumental after Hurricane Katrina hit in New Orleans. They were very instrumental in helping the community to defend itself from the KKK, who was riding around doing pretty terrible things, shooting people and whatnot, and they managed to fend them off because they were in a position to work with the local community that reached out to them, and then help them build back after the governmental order reasserted itself. So it definitely is potential power that you could be building by, building these movements that are centered on resilience and on providing for people's needs.
Yeah. What was really interesting is when they were talking about in Japan in particular, they were focusing on like what they can take from their local conditions. They weren't just thinking, let's stick some solar panels someplace, but they were really focusing on actually what does our ecology, what does our landscape have to offer us that we can use and utilize to help reduce our need on these complex supply chains and things like that can relocalize where our energy comes from, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that definitely was really cool. Very cool. Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting more of these stupid bot army in the Twitch stream there.
Yeah, I don't know what a bot army is, so
basically,
like 100.
No, yeah. So it's been a recent phenomenon on Twitch that you'll get all these obvious bot accounts, like the ones I'm getting all have a variation of the same name. It'll be just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, and they'll all mass follow a channel at the same time. And I don't really know what the purpose is. I don't know if they're trying to maybe make it so that they can like type a single chat that they'll all repeat and maybe try and crash the stream or something.
It's one of those things.
I don't really know what the purpose is yet.
Yeah, is that why the big channels, like, sorry everyone, I am totally Twitch illiterate. If you go on any of the big channels, there's always like random people like constantly posting like weird words like repeatedly and stuff like that. Is that like the same thing?
It might be the same thing. I think when it's like Hassan's channel or something like that, people just spam the same thing over and over just so it's like, oh, look at me, pick me, teacher, and stuff like that. So that might be where they're coming from, but it also might be that bot sort of thing. I just don't know enough about the phenomenon. I've just seen it happen to other streamers at different times.
Cool. Fukuoka is awesome for the person that wrote that.
Absolutely.
His work is amazing. I highly recommend it. It's a really great starting point to understand where a lot of permacultural thought came from. It was a lot of his work as well as a couple other folks. But if you're interested in that, I also recommend J. Russell Smith. Tree Crops is a really great book.
Ooh, I don't know that one. Cool.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite, probably all time.
Tree Crops.
It's pretty much J. Russell Smith back in the early 20th century was paying attention to like what traditional at that time were traditional methods for farming the landscape and utilizing local crops in North America, like persimmons and things like that, and understanding how to work with the resources that were available for livestock management and stuff like that. So it's a really great book. A lot of early North American permaculture resources were pretty much just hijacked from that book. But I recommend going to the source because it's great. It's a good book, and it's also super dense and informational. One Straw Revolution's also great. I also recommend Keyline Designs by P.A. Yalmond. If you are interested in like the water management, swales, key lines, all that stuff. Again, a lot of his work was hijacked by permaculture. So go to the source. He's a very convoluted writer, but it's worth trying to get through it because the content is really, really good. He also has this book that is not as popular called The City Forest, where he essentially imagines what using key lines to like essentially grab how you could design a city around gravity, which is super cool. That's key line, yes, like that, the second one. So yeah, it's a really interesting concept to design a city so that water, sewer, everything is managed through natural systems, and essentially try to provide a blueprint. If he wasn't so hard to understand, I think it'd be a much more popular book. So that's my tangent.
No, perfect. Yeah, that's great stuff too. I'm only just like I have only a surface understanding of P.A. Yeoman's work, but I definitely know that you're right. It did influence a lot of, like, even Bill Mollison himself was very much influenced by his work. So yeah, good stuff there. And we will be covering the One Straw Revolution in future permaculture streams. Whoops, sorry about that. So yeah, there's a whole documentary on him, so we'll check him out as well. But he's the pioneer of the do nothing method, where you look at all the different sort of tasks you have to do on a piece of property to produce food, and you say, what can we not do? What can we get away with not doing? So he was big on like not pruning orchard trees, because there's this big tradition of making them like the cherry trees or whatever they were look like an upturned sake cup. So you go up next to the trunk and just trim all the branches around until it was just a thin canopy of coming over it. And what he found was that when you do that sort of thing, the more you intervene in the development of that tree, the more you have to later on. The more care it takes. Otherwise, it starts getting crossed branches. It starts getting rot and infection, because you're opening up a lot of wounds in that tree by doing that sort of thing. And so he was like, what can we just not do? Can we just let it grow as it does and manage our harvesting and tending of it based on its needs that it's clearly asserting by growing in a certain way? So he was big on that. And then things like seed balls, we'll get into, where you take clay and seed and a little bit of fertilizer, and you mix it all together with water. You make these little balls, and it's like this compact packet of seeds that you can just toss out onto the land, and then it protects it from, say, like birds just coming by and eating it, or ants or something like that carrying it away, and it'll stay that way, protected, until enough rains come that it melts away the clay, and then it starts growing. And it's an easy way of sowing without having to have a tiller or any sort of mechanical process. So we'll definitely cover that later on. But yeah, another great thinker. So yeah. All right, I think we're getting towards the end here. This may be the very last segment. I think it must be. That's probably DMCA music, so I'm gonna cut that off right there. But yeah, there you have it. So that little last bit that they threw in there, we got to act like a community, not like individuals. So again, he's walking right up to some pretty close to some leftist ideas, but never quite being explicit about it. Probably because he wants to appeal to more people. I don't really know, but I think if you were in this chat, you're likely coming at it from a leftist perspective, and you should be like, my advice is to keep it that way when you're organizing. Don't go necessarily just for the broad appeal, although don't go out of your way to alienate people, I would say. But you got to be firm. You don't want to have your effort co-opted by the powers that be, and then the people that have vested interest in keeping things more or less the way they are, but just rearranging the deck chairs a little bit. Yeah, I would say that overall, transition towns is an interesting idea that's worth at least exploring on your own time. Check out maybe the Transition Towns Handbook, and maybe some more videos about it and stuff. And if it seems like something you want to do in your local area, I'd say go for it. But just keep in mind what it is your end goal is, or what it is your continuing goal is. And if it's just being a club to put some solar panels up on houses, maybe think a little bit deeper. Cast your net a little wider as to who you could be serving and what ways you could be serving them in people's daily lives.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Did you have any other final thoughts you want to throw out there as we're summing up here?
Yeah, I think it highlights the fact that we can do a lot when we don't use political language. We have a lot more common ground with a lot of people than we give ourselves credit for, give them credit for. And we need to be more understanding of the fact that not everyone is going to come at things with the same lens that we have and the same perspective, but that doesn't mean we can't find very important common ground. You know, not superficial things, but things that are going to fundamentally frame up the future that we have. And if we don't do that, then we're hurting ourselves just because of our own ego about our politics. And that's, no one wins from that.
Yeah, right on. Like, when it comes down to it, pretty much everyone has the same sorts of goals for their lives, in things like they want to have stability in their everyday life. They don't want to be food insecure or housing insecure. They want to provide good educational opportunities for their children and themselves. They want to form a sense of community, you know, be tied in some way to the places and the people that they live at and around or next to. So I think you're right, you can, you know, extend an olive branch to people that don't necessarily think the same way that you do, while at the same time just kind of bring them into your way of understanding things as well. So, like, say, start talking about food insecurity, start talking about housing insecurity, and say, hey, isn't this something that you would like to have as well? Not just, you know, these more superficial and individual actions and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of power in that as well.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's something we need to be better about on the left. And I think sometimes people get mad at me for saying that. And I think for some folks that might feel like it's challenging their politics in the sense of, like, maybe you're not fully leftist if you do this thing.
Yeah.
But, like, our goal isn't to make the world better just for leftists. Our goal is to make the world better for all of us. And
absolutely.
By proxy, you can't make the world better for leftists without making it better for all of us.
Yeah, we're literally all in this together, and that's not just you know, some sort of liberal platitude. That really is the case. That these people don't just go away because you defeat them in argument, or you know, you own their Twitter retweets or whatever it is that you're putting your metric on your online activism around. They still have to be people's neighbors. They still have to live in this world. So you're going to deal with them one way or another, and probably better to try and at least convince them of the things you say, rather than just chasing clout and you know, dunking on easy targets, just to get better standing within your own already established community. So I definitely agree with that as well. All right. Let me see if I can pull up your particular website.
Go to poorproles.com.
Yeah. Poor Proles.
I mean, you can try for the person that's making Shapiro feel bad. Like, there's nothing wrong with trying to make the world better that way. You do you.
Right.
Thank you. I'm assuming that's about me, not to toot my own horn, but I'm going to assume they're talking about my podcast and not Ben Shapiro's.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. All right. So I'm trying to pull up your link tree here. I don't know how it's...
There you go. That looks about right. We are working on a website.
Oh, okay.
It's just a very slow process because I'm tech illiterate, if you haven't figured that out yet.
Hey. We all got to start from somewhere.
Yeah, so you guys can check out our Instagram. That's where we're most active. We also have a Discord, which I recommend going to visit. You can shoot me a message on Instagram for the link.
Where's that Discord?
There's like 700 folks that are interested in agriculture and collapse out there. So it's definitely, if that's up your alley, come check it out. Pretty active, and there's a lot of smarter people than I am that are involved in various channels on different stuff that I know what I know, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily good at all things. So, yeah. We're also on YouTube, and we're building a bunch of YouTube content, but again, I'm not the most tech literate, so editing has been like the most dreadful thing in my life, and I have somebody helping me, but then it's also still the most dreadful thing in my life when they ask me what I want, because I just like utter random sentences that don't make sense because I don't know what I want because I don't do this stuff.
Yeah.
But it will be there is my point. In the next couple months, we should start having some video content up. Like I said, we got Instagram. We're most active there. Twitter, since the It Could Happen Here interview, we've been getting a lot more followers over there. Yeah. Come listen to our podcast.
Yeah. So here's the link to the podcast page. They're hosted by Podbean, but I would imagine that you can find them pretty much anywhere. Yep. One resource that I like to go to is podnews.net. They automatically aggregate all the sources of podcasts. So even though there's a million different platforms out there, seemingly a new one every day, if you just go to Pod News and you search for the one that you're looking for, it will take you to all the different places that they're available. So you got their Apple link, you got their Google link, Spotify, and then a whole bunch of really smaller ones and bigger ones too. Castbox is a little bit bigger, and of course Google Podcasts and iHeart. You're on Stitcher and Luminary. Those are two that I haven't been able to get on yet, but I'm hoping once I migrate, I'm going to migrate over to Podbean as well at some point, because it just seems like it's a little bit a cut above what Anchor is able to do for me, and definitely going to experiment with the live streaming stuff as well. But yeah, tons of different places that they're available. Just go to podnews.net. I'll put their link right up in the chat as well.
And also, we are releasing a new episode in like 10 minutes. So we usually release Sunday around 8 o'clock.
There you go.
So that's pretty cool. It's the one I had mentioned at the beginning of this. If you were here way back 2 hours and 50 minutes ago, we're interviewing somebody that specializes in honey locusts and the natural migration or the lack of natural migration in their footprint on the United States. And we talk a bit about the utilization of honey locust as a sugar crop. So
cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool conversation. He works out of State University of Buffalo, or whatever their acronym is for the New York State school system. So go check it out. We've got a bunch of content out. I was also on It Could Happen Here last week, so if you guys listen to It Could Happen Here, you can go check that out too. That's, I think, pretty much it. Oh, we have a Twitch. We haven't used it, but we have one.
Oh, cool.
So go check it out. There's no videos, but maybe someday.
I'll shout out your Twitch again in the comments here, so that people can find you there. Love to have more leftist Twitch streamers who know a thing or two about permaculture. They're few and far between at this point. So
I'll do my best.
Awesome, yeah.
I am as World Eater said, I am the old farmer that yells at clouds. So, that is 100% me about everything.
All right, so let me just shout you out one quick second there. Almanac. All right. Prole's Almanac. That should do it. So there you go. Now you can check out their Twitch page as well. Did I not spell it right or something? Jeez.
Twitch, I don't know what our Twitch handle is. I think it's Prole's Almanac.
Yeah.
I'm not terrible enough to have spelled it wrong, I hope, at this point.
It's probably me. I probably put in something wrong. But the Nightbot is supposed to shout it out. Maybe it did. Let me see. Oh, yes, it did. So on Twitch, it came up. It just didn't come up in the regular comments. So if you're watching on Twitch, yeah, cool. That link worked for you. Awesome. So, yeah, thank you so much, Andy, for coming on. I really had a good time going through this stuff with you. And I hope to definitely collaborate on future streams or podcasts or what have you.
Yeah, thanks. It was great to be on. You let me try out my Twitch life before I had to do it on my own account.
There you go. Yeah, and all I can say about that is just there's plenty of tutorial videos out there about using Twitch and even the restream what I'm doing here. Once you look at just a few of them, it's not all that complicated to get it set up and going. So, don't be intimidated by the tech curve that you have to catch up with. That's all I got to say about that, I guess.
Thanks. I'll take
But
that
anyway.
into consideration in my future.
Cool. I really hope you do. So anyway, thanks again for being on, and have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Okay, so that was Andy from the Poor Prole's Almanac, and we're going to wrap up the stream here as well. I've never done this through Restream, but we're going to try to raid on Twitch and see what that does to the Restream. It may end it abruptly, so just so you know. But if you do have any recommendations of who I should raid into, if you're on Twitch right now, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just pick some cool leftist content creators, or one in particular, and we will go with them. What would be a good one today? Anyone have any suggestions? Not seeing any yet. So, Sends Rules. Let's see what Sends Rules is up to. See if it might be something that's... Oh, okay. Doing the Hippy Dippy podcast. So I don't know about that. Let's find a better one to raid into. Oh, Class Time is still on. Let's see if Class Time is still going. If it is, I'm going to have to go through an ad. Jeez. Sorry about that, but thank you all for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you coming along for this trip. Thanks to all of you in the comments for making such poignant and relevant comments, and also cracking me up from time to time. I really do appreciate all that sort of thing. You can find me by going to my Linktree, which I'm going to put up right now. In fact, I'll put that up over the stream so you can see that. So yeah, go right there. You can find all my stuff by going to my Linktree. Follow me all the different places, and yeah, because now I'm streaming to YouTube, Facebook, through my Bread Theory page, as well as on Twitter, which I didn't even know you could do until recently. So that was cool to see. But I'm gonna raid you into Class Time now. So let's see if this works. We're going to switch it over to just Twitch, and we're going to see if this works to raid. And there you go. Thanks again for joining me. Luck Tam, everybody. It looks like it hasn't worked. We're going to try it again. We'll try it from just my OBS and see if that works. There we go. All right. Thanks again for being with me. Enjoy Class Time. He's a really great leftist streamer from Chicago, Kenzo Shibata.